Welcome back to another story on The Potter Show. This time, we're bringing you What if Harry walked into Gringotts at age 6 and asked, "Why is Dumbledore stealing from my parents' graves?" Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1. The pull the thing about magic, the real kind, the kind that lives in your blood and hums behind your sternum like a second heartbeat, is that it doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't care that you're 6 years old and small for your age and wearing a shirt that belonged to your cousin 3 sizes ago. It doesn't ask permission. It just moves. Harry Potter had been standing on the roof of the school gymnasium for 11 minutes before he realized he'd gotten there by thinking about it. He hadn't climbed. He hadn't jumped. He'd been running from Dudley and his friends, 4 of them this time, which wasn't fair by any standard Harry had developed in his short, difficult life, and the wall of the gymnasium had been rushing toward him at speed, and then he thought, very clearly, up, and then he was up. Sitting on the flat tar roof with the wind pulling at his too large shirt, and the sound of Dudley's confused, furious bellowing floating up from below like smoke. He sat there for a while. Long enough for the shouting to stop. Long enough for a cloud to move across the sun and back again. Long enough to look out over the neighborhood and notice, for the first time, that it was actually quite interesting from up here, the way all the identical houses made a kind of pattern, like someone had used a stamp repeatedly and slightly carelessly. He filed this observation away. He filed a lot of things away. It was how he got through days. The problem came when he tried to get down. He thought down and nothing happened. He thought it more firmly and still nothing, which was irritating and a little frightening in a way he refused to let become panic. Because panic was loud and loud things attracted attention, and attention at Privet Drive was almost never the good kind. He tried climbing, but the gymnasium wall was smooth rendered concrete and his fingers found no purchase. He sat back down. He thought, with careful, deliberate focus, about the ground. About being on it. About standing on it. About the specific patch of grass behind the big oak where Dudley's gang never went because of the wasp's nest. The world lurched. For half a second he experienced something that wasn't quite falling and wasn't quite flying and felt, above all, like being folded, like someone had taken the space between where he was and where he wanted to be and creased it, briefly, into nothing. Then he was standing behind the oak with his heart hammering and the wasp's nest humming 6 feet above him, and his knees slightly weak. He stood very still for a moment. Then he thought, I should go back before Aunt Petunia notices I'm gone. Then he thought, what if I didn't? It was the first time the second thought had ever beaten the first one. He was hungry. He was always hungry, but today was a specific, pointed kind of hungry because he'd burned toast this morning. Actually burned it, properly, so it was black on one side, and Aunt Petunia had made him skip breakfast as punishment, and told him he could think about the cost of bread while he sat in his cupboard. He had, in fact, thought about the cost of bread, and had found he didn't care about it even slightly, which was probably not the lesson intended. He had a £1 coin in the pocket of the too large trousers. He'd found it on the street 3 weeks ago and kept it in the toe of his left shoe. He'd been saving it without knowing what he was saving it for. He pulled it out now and looked at it. Somewhere in the city, not close, but not impossible, there was food. There was more than that, some small thrumming sense told him, something that wasn't quite hearing and wasn't quite feeling but lived in the same chest space as the thing that had put him on the roof. There was something interesting somewhere in the direction of London. Something that smelled, metaphorically, like answers to questions he hadn't known how to ask yet. Harry Potter put the coin back in his pocket, looked at the wasp's nest, and thought about London. The fold happened again, smoother this time, as if the magic appreciated being asked properly. He landed on a cobblestone street that smelled like pasties and tobacco, and something underneath those things that was warm and electric, like the air before a lightning strike. He stumbled on the uneven stones, caught himself on a wall, and looked up. The sign above his head read the Leaky Cauldron in letters that looked like they'd been painted by someone who kept changing their mind about how big each letter should be. Around him, London went about its London business. Taxis. Pigeons. a woman with a pushchair arguing with a phone box. None of them looked at the pub. None of them looked at him. He stood against the wall for a moment, testing whether anyone would notice him, and no one did, which was usual enough that he didn't think much about it. Harry had a talent for not being seen when he didn't want to be. He'd assumed this was simply a function of not being worth looking at, which was what the Dursleys implied whenever the topic of his general existence came up. He was beginning to suspect it might be something else. He pushed open the pub door. The inside of the leaky cauldron was dark and warm and smelled like something had been cooking in it for approximately 400 years. The clientele were unusual. Harry noticed this the way he noticed most things, quickly and without reacting to it, cataloging details for later inspection. There was a woman in the corner whose hat had something moving in it. There was a man at the bar whose hands were the wrong color, not sick wrong, just different wrong, a deep bluish green that he didn't seem to think was worth mentioning. There was a glass on a table refilling itself, which Harry watched for 3 full seconds before deciding that this was apparently normal. Nobody looked at him. The barman, a hunched, cheerful-looking man, was deep in conversation with someone at the far end of the bar. Harry walked through the pub, small, quiet, purposeful, a skill he'd developed to near perfection in the Dursley house, and came out the other side into a small walled courtyard. He stood in front of the brick wall and felt the pull in his chest double in strength, like a compass needle swinging to north. He raised his hand and, without really knowing why, he tapped the 3rd brick to the left of the iron sconce. Then the 2nd one up. The wall opened. He watched it happen without surprise, which surprised him later when he thought about it. Brick by brick the wall folded back, revealing an archway, revealing a street, revealing a world, and Harry stepped through it the way you step through a door you've been waiting your whole life to open, which is to say without hesitation and with enormous relief. Diagon Alley. He didn't know its name yet. He just knew it was right. The way the electric smell was stronger here, the way the pull in his chest became something almost musical, the way his feet felt certain of their direction for the first time in his life. He walked down the cobbled street and looked at everything with wide, steady eyes. Cauldrons in a shop window, stacked like copper mountains. Robes hanging in arrangements by color. A broom in a display that spun slowly on its own axis. An owl with a letter in its beak sitting on a post with the patient, commercial dignity of a taxi. Books in a window, open to pages that rewrote themselves as he watched. He could have spent hours. He didn't. The pull was stronger now, directed, and it led him down the alley and up the white marble steps of a building so large and deliberate it made the rest of the street feel like it was leaning away from it slightly. White marble. Bronze doors. And inside the bronze doors, silver doors, and standing at those silver doors, creatures that were not human. Harry looked at the goblins with the same focused, assessing look he gave everything unfamiliar, which was the same look he gave everything, because most things were unfamiliar. They were shorter than adults, taller than him. Their fingers were long and their faces were full of an intelligence that was pointed, like a tool kept sharp. They looked at people, he sensed, the way he looked at people, measuring, categorizing, noting discrepancies. He went up the steps. He went through the bronze doors and through the silver doors and into the marble hall, which was enormous and vaulted and lit by chandeliers of something that wasn't quite fire. And then he stood in the line of people waiting at the counters. There was a line, clearly there was a line, and he joined it because even at 6 Harry had an instinctive respect for systems that worked, and he waited. The person in front of him was a very wide witch in green robes who smelled like lavender and something sharper beneath it. She concluded her business and moved away. Harry stepped up to the counter. The goblin behind it looked down at him with eyes the color of old gold. He had a ledger open in front of him and a quill in his hand and an expression that suggested he had seen everything and been interested by none of it for approximately 60 years. He regarded Harry with professional neutrality. "Account business or exchange?" he said. His voice was like rocks shifting. Harry said, "I have a question." The goblin's quill didn't move. "Gringotts is a bank, not an information service. It's about an account," Harry said. "I think it might be my account. Or my parents' account. He paused, feeling his way through the thought. Someone is taking money from it. I think. I'm not completely sure, because I don't have the records, but there's. He stopped. He pressed 2 fingers to the center of his chest, where the pull lived. Something in here keeps telling me that something is wrong. With money that should be mine. And it feels like it's pointing here. The goblin, whose nameplate read Grakner, had stopped pretending to look at his ledger. He was looking at Harry now. Not in the way adults usually looked at him, which was dismissive or irritated or, in the Dursleys' case, somewhere between contempt and mild repulsion. He was looking at him the way Harry looked at things, measuring. Your name, Grakner said. Harry. Harry Potter. The quill snapped. Not broke, snapped, as if Grakner's hand had clenched involuntarily around it. The goblin looked at Harry's forehead. Harry didn't flinch. He was used to people looking at his scar. Then Grakner looked at his eyes. Then his hands. Wait here, Grakner said. Okay, Harry said. Grakner stepped down from his stool. Harry noted distantly that they used stools because the counters were built for human height, and walked, quickly and without apparent hurry in the way that people who are actually hurrying very fast sometimes do, through a door behind the counter. Harry waited. The marble hall continued its business around him. A cart loaded with someone's luggage trundled past, pushed by another goblin. A wizard in a tall hat was arguing quietly with a teller 3 counters down. Harry stood with his hands in the pockets of his 2 large trousers and looked up at the ceiling, which had been painted with a scene he didn't recognize, mountains and something flying between them, and fire, and figures both goblin and otherwise, and it looked less like decoration and more like a record. He was still looking at the ceiling when the doors behind the counter opened again and Grakner returned, followed by another goblin. This one was different. Older, visibly, in the way that ancient things are old, not frail but dense, as if time had compressed him rather than worn him. He was dressed differently than the tellers, in dark robes that had a quality of formality to them without being ceremonial. His eyes were the same old gold color but sharper, and he looked at Harry with an expression that was complicated in ways Harry couldn't fully read yet. I am Ragnak, the goblin said. Director of Gringotts. He paused. You are Harry Potter? Yes, Harry said. You asked about your parents' account. I said I think someone is stealing from it. Harry considered this for a moment. Actually, I think I said it differently, but that's what I meant. And what makes you think someone is stealing from it? Harry put his hand on his chest again. This. I don't know how to explain it better than that. It's been there for as long as I can remember, but it got louder after. He stopped. After some things happened at home. It led me here. And when I walked in, it felt like when you've been looking for something for a long time and you finally see it, and you know you're in the right place. He looked up at Ragnak directly. Are my parents' accounts here? They are, Ragnak said. He was watching Harry with an intensity that Harry found, if anything, reassuring. Intense attention from someone who was clearly intelligent was better, in his experience, than careless dismissal. The Potter family has banked with Gringotts for 11 generations. And is someone taking money from the accounts that shouldn't be? Ragnak was quiet for 3 seconds. It was not an uncertain silence. It was a considering one. Come with me, he said. He led Harry, not through the door behind the teller counters but through a door to the side, unlocked with a key that Ragnak wore on a chain at his wrist, into a corridor that was quieter than the main hall and lit with the same not-quite fire, and then into a room that was clearly an office, though not a grand one. It was a working room, shelves of ledgers, a desk with 3 active documents weighted down with polished stones, a chair size for goblins behind it, and Harry noticed, another chair size for a human child, which had appeared beside it with no fanfare, already positioned. Harry sat in it. Ragnak sat behind the desk and looked at him for a moment. Then he said with precision, Before I show you anything, I need to confirm your identity. Gringotts uses blood identification. You'll need to prick your finger and press it to an identification stone. He produced from a drawer a smooth gray stone, oval, the size of a palm. Beside it he placed a small silver needle in a velvet holder. It won't hurt more than a moment. Harry looked at the needle. Will it tell you if I'm actually Harry Potter? It will tell us your bloodline, your family ties, and your standing with Gringotts. Yes. What if someone put a spell on me to look like someone else? Ragnar's expression shifted in a way that might, in a human, have been a smile. The stone goes deeper than appearance. It reads what your blood knows about itself. Harry picked up the needle, pressed it to his index finger without ceremony, and pressed the resulting drop to the stone. The stone turned gold. Then it cracked open along a seam Harry hadn't seen and unfolded like a flower into something that was part document and part light, characters in a script he didn't recognize spiraling outward from the center in a widening gyre. Ragnar leaned forward and read it. His expression didn't change precisely, but something behind it did. He read for a long time, too long, Harry thought, for something that was just confirming a name. Well, Ragnar said finally, and he said it very quietly, in the tone of someone recalibrating something fundamental. You are Harry James Potter, son of James Charles Potter and Lily Havana Potter née Evans, heir to the ancient and noble house of Potter, heir by conquest to the ancient and noble house of Peveril. He paused. And heir by magical designation to 3 additional houses whose claims have not yet been formally adjudicated. Harry absorbed this. I have a lot of houses, he said. You have a great deal of everything, Ragnar said, and now there was something in his voice that was neither warm nor cold but extremely focused. Including, to answer your original question, yes. Someone has been taking from your accounts. From several of them. For the last 5 years. The room was quiet. Harry's hands were still in his lap. He'd put them there when he sat down and they'd stayed there, which was a thing he did when he was thinking hard, kept himself still so the thinking could move. He was doing a lot of thinking now. 5 years, he said. Since shortly after your parents' deaths. Who? And here Ragnar paused again, and this pause was the longest one yet, and Harry understood why. This was the kind of information that had weight, that once given couldn't be taken back, and whoever Ragnar was, he was clearly someone who understood that the giving of irreversible information required a moment's consideration. Harry waited. He was very good at waiting. The withdrawals, Ragnar said carefully, are authorized under the signatory code of one Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. He watched Harry's face. Do you know that name? Harry knew the name. The Dursleys never talked about magic, never, not a word. The topic was sealed like a room whose door had been walled over. But the name Dumbledore had surfaced twice in his life, both times when the Dursleys thought he was asleep. Once his uncle had said it with contempt, the way he said most things. Once his aunt had said it with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite grief and landed somewhere between the two. Harry had catalogued it. He'd catalogued everything. I know the name, Harry said. He was named co-executor of your parents' estate, Ragnar said. Along with a Sirius Orion Black, who is currently incapacitated. In Dumbledore's absence of accountability, he established himself as primary trustee of your accounts and has been withdrawing funds under the designation of guardianship expenses and trust administration fees and Ragnar unrolled a scroll that seemed to produce itself from one of the weighted documents on his desk. Memorial maintenance and charitable disbursement on behalf of the Potter family legacy. Harry looked at the scroll. He couldn't read the figures yet, but he could see they were large. He could see the column of dates, 5 years of them, running down the left side. He's been saying it's for me, Harry said. The guardianship expenses. Yes. I live with my aunt and uncle. I have a cupboard under the stairs. Harry said this without particular emotion, factually, the way you state information you've learned to live with. I don't think any of that money went to me. Ragnar's face did something then. It was brief and quickly controlled, but Harry caught it, a flash of something fierce and tight, there and gone. No, Ragnar said. It did not. How much? Harry asked. Ragnar looked at him steadily. I will show you the full ledger, he said. But I want to prepare you. The amount is significant. How significant? The withdrawals to date total approximately 4,200,000 galleons. Harry didn't know what a galleon was worth in pounds. He knew from the way Ragnar said it, from the quality of the number, the weight it carried in the room, that it was a lot. More than he could picture. More than the Dursleys had, certainly, more than all the houses on Privet Drive put together probably, a number that existed in a category beyond his current frame of reference. Okay, he said. Ragnar looked at him. Okay, he repeated, with something that was not quite a question. I mean, Harry turned his palms upward briefly, a gesture that wasn't quite a shrug. I can't change what's already gone. I can think about being angry about it, or I can think about what to do next. He paused. Is there anything I can do? Legally. Through Gringotts. Because I'm 6. You are the head of your family, Ragnar said, and the word family came out of his mouth with a formality that felt ancient. By blood and by magic. Age is a wizarding legal constraint. It is not a Gringotts constraint. He folded his long fingers together on the desk. Gringotts operates under its own law. The Goblin Wizard Accord of 1752 grants us autonomous jurisdiction over account management, and, under specific circumstances, over the recovery of misappropriated account assets. Specific circumstances meaning this, Harry said. Meaning this, Ragnar agreed. Harry looked at the scroll again. He looked at the office around him, the dense, purposeful shelves of ledgers, the working desk, the not-quite fire. He looked at Ragnar, who was watching him with that sharp, calculating attention, and Harry thought, this person is deciding whether to help me. Not out of kindness. Out of something else. Interest, maybe? Or principle. He thought, I need to figure out what he actually wants. What does Gringotts get out of this? Harry asked. Ragnar was quiet for a moment. Then he said, we get the recovery of funds that were removed from our institution under fraudulent authorization. We get the application of the reparations clause, which allows punitive interest on misappropriated assets. We get legal standing to apply that clause to one of the most politically powerful wizards in Britain. He paused. And we get the satisfaction of seeing the law applied to someone who has long assumed he was above it. You don't like him, Harry said. No. Has he stolen from other people? Through Gringotts? That, Ragnar said, is something we will look into. Harry thought about this. Then he looked at Ragnar directly and said, I want to see the full ledger. I want to see everything that's been taken and what it was labeled as. And then I want to understand exactly what we can do about it, and how long it will take. He paused. Can you explain things to me even though I'm young? I understand things when they're explained properly. Ragnar looked at him for a long moment. Outside, through walls thick enough that sound was more suggestion than substance, the business of the bank continued. The distant clatter of carts going down to the vaults, the murmur of transaction, the enormous and different machinery of accumulated wealth. In here, in this working room, something else was happening. Something that felt less like banking and more like the first move in a game that had been waiting for a player. Yes, Ragnar said. He stood and went to the shelves. He took down a ledger, large, leather-bound, dark green, with Potter embossed on the spine in gold letters that seemed to shift slightly as the light caught them. He brought it to the desk and opened it and turned it to face Harry, and then he did something Harry hadn't expected. He sat back down, and he waited, and he let Harry look at it himself first. Harry looked. The ledger was in 2 columns. The left side was deposits, inheritances, investment returns, a long, dense history of a family building something over generations. The right side was withdrawals. His parents' names appeared in the early pages with the regularity of people managing a life. Then there was a date, October 31st, 1981, and after it everything on the left column stopped, and the right column changed character. The withdrawals became larger, more frequent. They acquired labels, long official-sounding labels, guardian's stipend, quarterly disbursement, trust administration, Educational Fund Preparation. Memorial Maintenance, Potter Family Legacy Charitable Disbursement. Legal Consultation Fees, Estate Administration. On and on, page after page, year after year, a bureaucratic fiction of care. Harry pressed his finger to one line. This one. Educational Fund Preparation. What's this? A fund established in your parents' will for your school supplies, books, and tuition costs, Ragnock said. It was designated to remain sealed until your 11th birthday, and then transferred to a personal account in your name. The principal has been withdrawn in 6 installments over 4 years. Harry turned the page. He didn't comment. He kept reading. He found the line about the memorial withdrawals. He found the entry from 14 months ago, a single withdrawal of 200,000 galleons labeled Charitable Trust, in memory of Lily and James Potter, established by APWB Dumbledore. He stared at it. He gave money away in my parents' names, Harry said. From their accounts. Without asking me? Yes. And does he get credit for being charitable? Is there a public record? There is, Ragnock said. The Dumbledore Memorial Foundation was announced in the Daily Prophet 18 months ago to considerable acclaim. Harry sat back. The chair was slightly too big for him, most furniture was, but he sat in it with a stillness that had nothing to do with his size. He looked at the ceiling of Ragnock's office, which was plain plaster, not painted, and he thought about what it meant to take something from dead people and put your own name on it. He thought about what it meant to have your parents become a charity donation, a press announcement, a line in a ledger under someone else's signature. He thought, I don't have a photograph of them. I've never seen their faces. He thought, he had 4 million galleons of theirs and he couldn't send a photograph. Okay, he said, and his voice came out steady, which he was grateful for. What's the reparations clause? Tell me exactly how it works. Ragnock told him. It took 40 minutes. Ragnock was a thorough explainer. He didn't talk down to Harry, didn't simplify in condescending ways, but he also didn't assume knowledge Harry didn't have, and when Harry asked questions he answered them directly. The reparations clause was an ancient provision in the Goblin-Wizard Accord. If Gringotts could demonstrate that account assets had been misappropriated through fraudulent authorization, the bank could not only recover the assets with punitive interest, 20% annually from the date of first unauthorized withdrawal, but could also place a legal hold on the financial dealings of the responsible party. All their accounts. All their investments. Everything that moved through Gringotts. Dumbledore banked with Gringotts. He had for 90 years. If we do this, Harry said, he'll know. Yes. As soon as the hold goes on his accounts, he'll know someone found out. He'll try to do something. Undoubtedly. What can he actually do? To me. To. Harry gestured at the room. To this. He cannot touch Gringotts' assets once the reparations clause is invoked, Ragnock said. The Accord guarantees that. He cannot use magic within these walls. He cannot bribe, coerce, or politically pressure a Gringotts action once it is formally filed. A pause. What he can do is attempt to find you and manage you, I suspect is the word he would use. He is, as I said, politically powerful. He has allies. He has a formidable personal reputation. Ragnock looked at Harry with that same direct, measuring attention. He has, in the past, found solutions to obstacles that were very much not in those obstacles' interest. Harry thought about this. He thought about a man who had taken 4 million galleons and labeled it kindness. He thought about a man who had left a 6-year-old in a house with no photographs and no food and had called it safe. He thought about what kind of solution a man like that would find for a 6-year-old who had walked into Gringotts and started asking questions. I'm not going back to my aunt and uncle's house, Harry said. No, Ragnock agreed, with a flatness that suggested this had already occurred to him. You're not. Can I? Harry stopped, thought about how to ask this. Is there somewhere here? Or connected here? Somewhere he can't reach me while this is happening? Gringotts has guest facilities, Ragnock said. They are rarely used. They were established under the Accord for precisely these situations, cases where a client's physical safety is relevant to the protection of their assets. He paused. You would be, legally speaking, a ward of Gringotts for the duration of the proceedings. Under our protection. Under our law. Would that hold? Against him? Ragnar said, with careful, deliberate weight. In 1100 years of Gringotts history, no wizard has successfully extracted a Gringotts ward from our protection against their will. He paused again. Albus Dumbledore knows this. Harry nodded. He looked at the ledger one more time, the long columns of his parents' wealth, redistributed and relabeled and spent on someone else's reputation. He thought about the pull in his chest, the thing that had brought him here, the thing that had lived in his sternum for as long as he could remember and never felt like coincidence. All right, he said. Let's do it. Ragnar looked at him. Then he reached into a drawer of his desk and produced a document, already prepared, Harry noticed, which meant Ragnar had been thinking about this since Grakner had come through the door. He placed it on the desk and placed a quill beside it. The reparations filing requires your signature, Ragnar said. As account holder and injured party. Once signed, it cannot be withdrawn. I know, Harry said. The consequences, I know, Harry said again. Not impatiently, but with a certainty that was simply present, like the floor was present, like the walls were present. Ragnar looked at him for a long moment. He was an ancient creature, Ragnar. He had seen empires consolidate and collapse, had seen generations of wizards who thought themselves extraordinary turn out to be merely comfortable, had seen promises made and broken and made again. He looked at this small, underfed 6-year-old in clothes that didn't fit, sitting in a chair slightly too large for him with the ledger of his parents' stolen legacy on the desk in front of him, and something shifted in the back of his gold eyes. Harry picked up the quill and signed his name. His signature was careful and clear, a child's handwriting, deliberate and slightly large, not yet the easy flow of adult script. Harry James Potter. The moment the quill lifted from the page, the document glowed for 1 second with a light that wasn't quite gold and wasn't quite white, and somewhere in the vast machinery of the bank, something moved. Right, Harry said. He set the quill down. He looked at Ragnar. Can I see the rest of the ledger? I want to know everything. We'll need food, Ragnar said, and stood, and went to the door, and it was the first thing he said that suggested he was thinking of Harry as something other than a legal entity, something smaller, something that needed food because it was 6 years old and hadn't eaten since yesterday. And I will have a room prepared in the guest facilities. He paused at the door. Is there anyone who knows where you are? Harry thought about the school roof. About the wasp's nest. About Privet Drive, where his absence would eventually be noticed and would produce first annoyance, and then fury and never, not once, anything that could be called worry. He thought about whether there was a single person in his life whose knowledge of his whereabouts would constitute safety rather than danger. No, he said. Ragnar nodded, as if this was not a tragedy but simply a fact, which Harry appreciated. Then we will proceed as quickly as possible, he said. Before anyone begins to look. He opened the door. Harry slid off the too large chair and followed him into the corridor, and behind them the office was quiet, and on the desk the signed document pulsed once more with its gold-white light, and somewhere beneath them, deep in the vaults, the Potter family magic, ancient and patient and very, very awake, began to move. Chapter 2. The ledgers the guest room Ragnar gave him was underground. Not in an unpleasant way. Harry had lived in a cupboard for most of his remembered life, so underground with a proper bed, a lamp that burned steadily without flickering, and walls that didn't have pipes running through them was an objective improvement. The room was carved from the same white stone as the bank above, but warmer here, deeper, and the bed had actual sheets and a pillow that wasn't flat. There was a small table. There was a chair. On the table when he arrived was a plate of food that he didn't look at for a full 10 seconds because he was making himself slow down, making himself not react the way hunger wanted him to react, which was badly. He ate everything. There was bread and something roasted and a bowl of something warm and thick that tasted like it had been cooked slowly and with attention. He ate it all, and then he sat on the edge of the bed and pressed his palms to his knees and breathed. He thought about the ledger. He thought about the number, 4,200,000, and tried to make it real in some way that he could hold, but it kept sliding out of his grasp, too large for the frame of reference he'd been given by a life on privet drive. What he could hold, what fit perfectly and precisely in his chest like a key in a lock, was the column of dates. 5 years of them. Every quarter, sometimes more. While he ate less than Dudley's hamster and wore Dudley's cast-offs and slept in a cupboard with a broken light, there had been, every 3 months, a tidy bureaucratic fiction of guardianship expenses being processed in a ledger in a bank he hadn't known existed. He lay back on the bed and looked at the stone ceiling. The stone was veined with something faintly luminescent, thin threads of it running through the white like rivers on a map. He watched them for a while. They didn't move, but the light in them shifted with the lamp, so they seemed to, enough that watching them was interesting without being demanding. Harry had a talent for finding things interesting when most people wouldn't have bothered, which was less a talent and more a survival mechanism that had become genuinely useful. He thought, I signed the document. It's done. Something has started. He thought, he's going to find out. He thought, very deliberately, about what kind of man Dumbledore was, not what kind of monster, not what kind of villain, because Harry had met his uncle's variety of villain and Dumbledore clearly wasn't that. His uncle was blunt force. His uncle was contempt made into a body. What Harry had seen in that ledger was something different, intelligence applied to self-justification. Every withdrawal carefully labeled. Every theft dressed in the language of care, of administration, of doing it for the family legacy. That was a kind of person who would have reasons. Who would look at Harry and explain, calmly and with complete sincerity, why everything he'd done was actually for Harry's benefit. That kind of person was harder to fight than a blunt one. Harry stared at the luminescent veins in the ceiling and thought, you have to be faster than them, and you have to know what they're going to say before they say it. He fell asleep thinking about it, and woke up knowing he needed to see the full ledger today. Not tomorrow. Today. He found a set of clothes on the chair that hadn't been there the night before, goblin-made, he suspected, because they fit him, which almost no clothes in his experience had ever done. They were dark, simple, well-made. He changed into them with the reverent efficiency of someone who understood what fitting clothes meant, which was that someone had noticed you had a body that deserved to be in them. He found Ragnar's office by memory. The corridors of Gringotts below the public level were logical if you paid attention, which Harry did, mapping turns and junctions with the automatic precision of someone who'd learned early that knowing your exits was important. He knocked. Come, Ragnar said. The office was exactly as he'd left it, except the desk now had 3 additional ledgers on it, and beside them a tray with tea and toast, and Ragnar was already behind his desk with his reading spectacles on, small, wire-framed things that looked faintly absurd on a goblin face but which Ragnar wore with the dignity of someone who did not acknowledge the possibility of looking absurd. He looked up at Harry and then at the toast. Eat first, he said. We can talk while I eat, Harry said, sitting down. Ragnar regarded him for a second. Yes, he said. I suppose we can. You pulled more ledgers, Harry said, pouring his own tea because the cup was there and waiting. I pulled everything relevant to the Potter accounts. Including. Ragnar removed his spectacles and used them to gesture at the second ledger, larger and older than the first, its spine worn. The original trust documentation. Your parents' will. Harry put down his toast. I can see their will? You are the principal beneficiary and the heir. Yes. Can I? He stopped himself, reordered the priority. Can we do the current ledger first? The withdrawals? All of them. And then the will? Ragnar opened the current ledger. He turned it to face Harry and then, with the same deliberate respect he'd shown the day before, letting Harry look, letting Harry think, not rushing or explaining preemptively, he waited. Harry pulled the ledger closer and started from the beginning. Not from the withdrawals, from the beginning, from the earliest entries, which were dated in the 1880s. Deposits, investments, land purchases, transactions between the Potter family and other families, some of the names familiar from something he couldn't locate, some utterly unknown. He was looking for the architecture of it, the shape of what his family had been. They'd been considerable. That was the word that came to him as he worked through the pages. Not flashy. Not the kind of wealth that announced itself. But careful and cumulative and deeply rooted, the kind of fortune built over generations by people who were smart about what they kept and what they let go. The Potter Vault, the main one, which Ragnar confirmed was one of 7 separate accounts in Harry's name, had held at its peak, in the early 1970s, something in the region of 9 million galleons in liquid assets alone, not counting property, investments, and the contents of the family vault, which had its own inventory. 7 accounts, Harry said. Yes. The main vault, trust account for general estate. The family vault, heirlooms, documents, irreplaceable objects, sealed at the death of the last Potter adult. The educational trust, designated for schooling costs. The investment portfolio account, managed by Gringotts on the family's behalf, accruing returns. The property management account, for the maintenance of Potter family holdings. Ragnar paused. The charitable trust account, established by your grandparents for philanthropic purposes. And the 7th? A pause. The 7th account is the oldest. It predates the others by several centuries. It is, Ragnar chose his word carefully, deep. It is the account attached to the family magics, the ancestral holdings, the hereditary properties that come with the Potter name and its associated titles. It is not a gold account in any meaningful sense. It is more of a record, a declaration of what the family is. Harry thought about this. He couldn't touch that one. No. That account requires blood identification at the vault door. It requires the heir to be physically present and magically recognized. It has never been accessed since your father's death. What's in it? I don't know entirely, Ragnar said, and the admission seemed to cost him something. Goblins, Harry sensed, did not like not knowing the contents of things in their care. The family vault records are sealed even from our internal auditors. What I know is that it exists, it is substantial, and it has been, waiting. He paused again. Your blood identification yesterday included a resonance from that vault. When the stone opened, it registered your presence. Harry sat back. It knows I'm here. Something does, Ragnar said. They looked at each other. Then Harry picked up his toast and went back to the ledger. The withdrawals started on December 15, 1981. 6 weeks after his parents died. The first one was 50,000 galleons, labeled estate administration, initial legal costs. Harry read it and thought about what it meant. 6 weeks, his parents 6 weeks dead, and the first hand into the account. He thought about whether that was grief or calculation, and he thought it was probably both, which was somehow worse than either alone. He read every entry. He didn't rush and he didn't skim. Ragnar refilled his tea at some point without being asked, and at some other point the toast was replaced with something more substantial, and Harry worked through the ledger with the focused, quiet efficiency of someone doing something that mattered. The details accumulated. The guardian's stipend, theoretically meant to cover Harry's living expenses at his guardian's home, had been paid quarterly to an account registered under APWB Dumbledore, acting trustee. Not to the Dursleys. Not to any account associated with Privet Drive or Vernon Dursley or anyone who'd ever bought Harry a meal. To Dumbledore directly. The educational trust had been drawn on 6 times. The first withdrawal, Harry noted, predated his 4th birthday. He read the label, Pre-Educational Preparation Fund, Early Learning Resources, and thought about the broken crayons he'd found in a bin at school and snuck home because Dudley didn't use them, and they were technically trash. The charitable trust disbursements he'd seen referenced the day before, but seeing them in full was different. 14 separate charitable donations over 4 years, all made in the names of James and Lily Potter, totaling over 800,000 galleons. some to legitimate-sounding magical causes. Some to organizations Harry suspected, without yet having the knowledge to confirm, were connected to Dumbledore's political sphere in ways that would matter. He closed the ledger. He sat with his hands flat on the cover. "The charitable donations," he said. "The ones in my parents' names. Can we get a list of where the money went? All of it?" "We have the transaction records," Ragnock said. "We can trace every galleon." "Some of it's probably actually charitable," Harry said. "But some of it probably went places that benefited him. Politically. People who owe him things." He paused. "If we can show that, it's not just theft, it's using a dead family's money to buy himself power." Ragnock looked at him with that same gold-eyed measuring expression. "That is a sophisticated observation for someone who ate toast 20 minutes ago." "I've had a lot of time to think about things," Harry said. "My cupboard was small, but I had decent thinking time." He said this without self-pity, which made it land harder, he noticed, than if he'd been trying for sympathy. He hadn't been. He'd just been accurate. "Can I see the will now?" The will was old in a way the ledger wasn't, not aged paper, exactly, but dense with the weight of legal magic, the kind of document that had been sealed and witnessed and bound in ways that went beyond ink. Ragnock placed it on the desk with a certain carefulness, as if the document required it. "The original was sealed in the Ministry of Magic archive," Ragnock said. "What I have here is the Gringotts registered copy, filed when the estate was opened. It carries equal legal weight." Harry looked at it. At the top, in a clear, firm hand, the last will and testament of James Charles Potter and Lily Vanna Potter, this day the 31st of October 1981. He felt something then. Not grief, exactly. He couldn't grieve people he'd never known, not properly, but something adjacent to it, something that was about potential and its absence. The 31st of October 1981 was the day they died. They'd written their will that day. He read it carefully. His parents had been thorough. The will designated him sole heir to all Potter family holdings, accounts, properties, and titles. It designated Sirius Orion Black as his primary guardian and magical guardian, with full parental rights and responsibilities in the event of both parents' deaths. It designated Alice and Frank Longbottom as secondary guardians in the event that Sirius was unable to fulfill the role. It contained an explicit clause, underlined, which Harry noticed and noted, stating that under no circumstances is the minor child Harry James Potter to be placed with Petunia Disley Evans, as this placement would remove him from the magical world and expose him to a known hostile environment. Harry read that line 3 times. He read it a third time to make sure he was reading it right. Then he looked up at Ragnock. Ragnock met his eyes. "They knew," Harry said. "My parents knew. They specifically said—" He stopped. He pressed his hand flat on the will. "They specifically said not to put me there." "And he put me there anyway." "Yes," Ragnock said. "He had this document. He was co-executor. He read this." "Yes. And he put me there anyway." Harry's voice was still steady. The steadiness was something he was working for, not something he was naturally feeling, but he was committed to it. Why? This was the question, Harry could see, that Ragnock had been expecting and perhaps dreading, not because he didn't have an answer but because the answer was the kind that opened doors to rooms full of very large, very complicated problems. "The current theory within Gringotts," Ragnock said carefully, "based on our knowledge of the magical world's politics and the available evidence, is that you were placed there specifically because of what you are. Because of what happened on the night your parents died." Harry looked at him. "What did happen?" "Nobody's ever told me anything. My aunt won't talk about it. My uncle says—" He stopped. What his uncle said wasn't worth repeating, and Ragnock probably didn't need the detail. "Nobody's told me anything." Ragnock was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you know the name Voldemort?" The name dropped into the room like a stone into water. Harry felt something, the magic in his chest, the pull, tightened and then expanded, like a breath. "I've heard it," Harry said. Adults go funny when someone says it. Like you're supposed to be scared. Many people are. He was. Ragnar considered his vocabulary. A dark wizard of considerable power. He killed a great many people over approximately 11 years. Your parents among them. On the night of October 31st, 1981, he came to your house in Godric's Hollow and he killed your father, and he killed your mother, and he tried to kill you. Harry sat very still. He tried, he said. His killing curse rebounded. From you. He was destroyed. Not killed, as it later emerged, but destroyed enough to be effectively gone. You survived with a scar. Ragnar nodded slightly at Harry's forehead. The wizarding world has credited your survival to a variety of things: your mother's sacrifice, ancient blood magic, luck. The truth is that nobody entirely knows why it happened. Including, as far as Gringotts has been able to determine, Dumbledore. But he has a theory. Harry said. He has a theory. Ragnar confirmed. We don't know exactly what it is. What we know is that he placed you with your aunt rather than your godfather or the Longbottoms. That he has maintained control of your financial assets. That he has kept the wizarding world, and you, in a specific kind of ignorance about your situation. Ragnar paused. These are not the actions of a man simply administering an estate. They are the actions of a man managing an asset. The word landed precisely. Harry felt it land. An asset. Not a child. Not James and Lily Potter's son. An asset to be managed, positioned, used at the appropriate time for whatever purpose Dumbledore's long, careful plan required. He's keeping me for something, Harry said. We believe so, Ragnar said. We don't know what. Harry looked at the will again. At the underlined clause. At his parents' handwriting. His father's, he could tell, was the left-hand signature, slightly forward-leaning, a person who wrote quickly. His mother's was the other one, careful and clear. He thought about two people sitting down on the last day of their lives and writing this, writing not Petunia, not there, not hostile, and he thought about how they tried, in whatever time they had, to protect him. I want to find Sirius Black, Harry said. Ragnar was quiet. He's my godfather. He was supposed to take care of me. The will says primary guardian with full parental rights. Harry looked up. Where is he? Why is he incapacitated? Ragnar said. He is in Azkaban. Harry didn't know what Azkaban was. He could tell from the way it came out of Ragnar's mouth that it was serious, more than serious, that it was the kind of word that arrived with freight. Prison? The wizarding prison. He was convicted of, allegedly, betraying your parents' location to Voldemort. And of subsequently killing 12 muggles and a wizard named Peter Pettigrew. Harry thought about this. Was he tried? Ragnar's pause was measured. No. Harry stared at him. He's been in prison for 5 years and he was never tried? No formal trial appears in the ministry records. He was processed and imprisoned. The political climate immediately after Voldemort's fall was chaotic. Many decisions were made quickly and without standard procedure. That's not legal, Harry said. Even I know that's not legal. You have to have a trial. In principle, yes. Who decided to put him there without a trial? Ragnar said. The records suggest the decision was effectively made by. He stopped. He looked at Harry with something that was almost, in the very restricted vocabulary of his expressions, sympathy. By Albus Dumbledore. The room was quiet for a long time. Harry put both hands flat on the desk, on top of the will. He looked at his own hands, small, slightly scarred in ways that had mostly faded, brown from outdoor time and manual work. He breathed in and breathed out and thought with the most careful deliberateness he'd yet applied to anything. Dumbledore had removed his godfather. His will-designated guardian, the person legally supposed to have him. Removed him without a trial, without the legitimacy of a trial, and put him somewhere unreachable, and then stepped into the empty space where a real guardian should have been and started drawing on the accounts. Had then placed Harry with people his own mother had specifically said were hostile. He'd taken everything. The family, the money, the protection, the future. And he'd labeled it, all of it, as care. I want Sirius out of prison, Harry said. That will require. I know it'll be complicated. I know it'll take time, and I know you can't just open a prison. I'm not stupid. Harry's voice was level. But I want it to happen. And I want you to tell me what it takes and who we need and how we start. Ragnarok looked at him. There was something in the goblin's face now that hadn't been there at the start, something past measuring, past assessment, that was less comfortable and more alive. The Wisengamot, Ragnarok said. A formal petition for trial review. It would require a legal advocate, a member of the Wisengamot willing to introduce the petition, and evidence that the original process was flawed. He paused. We can provide the last. The middle would require contact with someone in the wizarding establishment who is willing to move against Dumbledore. Are there people like that? There are people, Ragnarok said carefully, who care deeply about the law and who would be displeased to learn that it had been circumvented so thoroughly. The head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, for instance. Another pause. Amelia Bones. She is incorruptible, in our experience. She is also politically independent enough to act if given sufficient evidence. Can we contact her through Gringotts? Officially? So it's on record? Gringotts can send a formal notification of irregularity to Dimeli, Ragnarok said. Under the Accord, such a notification triggers a mandatory review. He paused. We have never sent one. It would be unprecedented. But you can. We can. Harry sat back. He drummed his fingers once on the desk, one quick rhythm, thinking, and then stopped. There's something else, he said. In the will. The Longbottoms. Secondary guardians. They're also incapacitated. You said they were when you said Sirius was? Ragnarok's expression shifted. It went somewhere quieter and harder. Frank and Alice Longbottom were tortured into insanity, he said. Approximately 2 months after Voldemort's fall. By Death Eaters who allegedly were still acting on his orders. They are in the long-term ward of St. Mungo's Hospital. They have a son, Neville, who was born around the same time as you. Death Eaters, Harry said. Voldemort's people. Yes. Were they caught? 4 of them were. 3 are in Azkaban. 1. Ragnarok paused in a particular way. 1 was tried by Bartemius Crouch Sr., then head of Dimeli, convicted on testimony that was, in retrospect, unusually rapid, and sentenced. He died in Azkaban 2 years ago, according to official records. Harry noticed the according to official records with the precision of someone who'd learned to hear what people left out of sentences as much as what they put in. He filed it. He had a lot of things filed now. Okay, he said. What about the Potter properties? The will mentions properties. Ragnarok visibly settled into the more comfortable territory of tangible assets. Your family held 4 properties, he said, opening the 3rd ledger, the one Harry hadn't touched yet, the property record. The family home in Godric's Hollow. Destroyed on October 31, 1981, still standing as a ruin, now a memorial site. A manor property in the Welsh countryside, Potter Keep. Currently maintained under a Gringotts-administered maintenance fund, which has been depleting because the maintenance fund money has been going somewhere else. Yes. A London townhouse in the Magical Quarter, currently rented to a wizarding family, the rental income theoretically flowing to your trust account. Ragnarok's tone on theoretically was perfectly dry. And a property in the Scottish Highlands, the original Potter ancestral estate. Undeveloped. It has been under a magical seal since your great-grandmother's death. Your blood identification has almost certainly unlocked it. What's in the ancestral estate? Unknown. It has been sealed for 63 years. Harry thought about a locked place that had been waiting 63 years. He thought about the 7th vault, the deep one, the one that had registered his presence. He thought about magic that recognized its own blood and woke up for it. Can we go to the vault? He said. The 7th one. The family one. Ragnar looked at him. It would require a vault journey. It is deep. How deep? Deeper than any standard vault. It is significant. Ragnar paused. The cart journey is not comfortable. I'm fine, Harry said. There may be magical responses when the vault opens. If the family magics have been dormant for 5 years and recognize their heir, the response could be, "Can you stop it from hurting me?" No. But I can be present, and our healers are on this level. Ragnar regarded him steadily. I am not suggesting we don't go. I am suggesting we prepare. Harry looked at him for a moment. You're being careful with me, he said. Not because I'm fragile. Because I'm important. It wasn't an accusation. It was just an observation, stated in the same flat factual tone Harry used for most things. Ragnar looked at him, and this time what crossed his face was unmistakable, something brief and complicated and not entirely calculated. Both, Ragnar said. Not mutually exclusive. Harry thought about that for a second. It was, he had to admit, a decent answer. They went to the vault after lunch, another full meal that Harry ate with the same unsentimental thoroughness, and the cart journey was exactly as advertised, not comfortable, very fast, and longer than any vault journey Harry would later experience in his life. They went down past levels he could sense more than see, through darkness and heat and the occasional blue flash of ward light, deeper and deeper until the air changed quality entirely, becoming something older and more pressured. The vault door was not like the others. The others he'd glimpsed in passing, iron and bronze, some with dragon ward light glowing at their edges. This one was stone. White stone like the bank above, but shot through with the same luminescent veining he'd seen in his bedroom ceiling, and the veins were active here, moving, pulsing with a rhythm that was slow and enormous and felt, standing in front of it, uncomfortably like a heartbeat. There was no keyhole. There was no handle. There was a depression in the center of the door, palm-sized, slightly concave. Harry stepped off the cart. He looked at the door for a moment. Then he walked up to it, pressed his right palm to the depression, and waited. The door knew him. That was the only way he could describe it later. Not that it opened, though it did, but that it responded, the way something responds when it has been waiting and the waiting is finally over. The veins flared. The pulse quickened. A sound that wasn't sound moved through the stone under his feet and the stone around him and through his hand and up his arm and into his chest where the pull lived, and the pull answered it. The door opened. What was inside was large. Larger than the door suggested, the way some magical spaces were, depth added where physics said there wasn't room for it. There were shelves. There were chests. There were things in cases and things hanging on walls and things piled with the accumulated particularity of 11 generations of careful keeping. Books. Weapons. Portraits. Moving portraits, and in them people who looked at Harry with expressions he couldn't read and then, as he stepped fully into the vault, began to look at him with something that converged, across every face, towards something he didn't have a name for because nobody had ever looked at him that way before. Recognition. Not of his face, of something behind it. Something in him that matched something in them. Potter, said one of the portraits. Old woman, white-haired, eyes like his. It's about bloody time. Harry almost laughed. He held it to a smile. Sorry, he said. I only found out yesterday. Found out what, exactly? Said the portrait, sharp, bright, a woman who had been formidable and retained it across death. That I existed, Harry said. Sort of. I mean, I knew I existed. I found out about everything else. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, with a precision that felt like it was confirming something she'd already known. You have James's eyes and your mother's way with words. And your. She tilted her head, the way the really perceptive people did. Very young to be standing here alone. I'm not alone, Harry said. He glanced back at Ragnar, who had come into the vault and was standing near the entrance with the posture of someone professionally neutral who was watching everything. And I'd rather be here young than not here at all. The portrait studied him. Yes, she said. I suppose that's true. A pause. I am Doria Potter née Black, your great-grandmother. And you, young man, have a very great deal to learn about what you've inherited. She paused. But I can see you already know that. Can you teach me? Harry said. Doria smiled. It was the kind of smile that had history in it. That, she said, is exactly the right question. Harry turned slowly in the vault, taking in the shelves, the cases, the depth of it. He thought about 11 generations of people who'd put things here for exactly this moment, not knowing his name, not knowing his face, but knowing that someday someone would come with his blood and his eyes and his pull in their chest, and they need what was stored here. He thought about Dumbledore, who had known this vault existed and had never found a way in. He found the grimoire on the second shelf from the right, behind a glass case that opened at his touch. It was thick, leather-bound, dark as old wood, with Potter stamped on the cover in the same gold letters as the ledger upstairs. When he picked it up, it warmed in his hands, not unpleasantly, like the warmth of something that has been kept in trust and is glad to be claimed. He held it against his chest and looked at Doria. Can I take things from here? He asked. Is that allowed? It's yours, she said with a mildness that contained a universe of implication. All of it. Everything here belongs to you. Harry looked around the vault one more time. He looked at the shelves. He looked at the cases. He looked at the portraits, all of them watching, this gallery of people who had blood like his and who had, over 11 centuries, built something and kept it and waited. Okay, he said quietly. He held the grimoire, he looked at Ragnarok, and there was something in his face at that moment that Ragnarok would think about later, not during the proceedings, not during the political storm that was about to come, but quietly, in his office, in the way that memories surface without permission. A 6-year-old standing in an ancient vault, holding his family's book of secrets, looking at the world with eyes that were already deciding what to do with it. The director of Gringotts, who had served 11 centuries of Potter clients, who had managed 9 dynasties and watched 12 wars and had never, not once, involved himself personally in the affairs of the families in his care, felt something move in the architecture of his intentions. He picked up the cart's guide rod. We should go up, he said. We have letters to write. Yes, Harry said. He didn't move toward the door yet. He was still looking at the portraits, at Doria, at the row of faces beyond her, at the long line of people who were his. Can they? He stopped, thought about how to ask it. Can they talk to the other portraits? In the other Potter properties? Is that how portraits work? Generally speaking, a portrait can move between frames if frames are connected, Ragnarok said. The family vault portraits can move to any portrait frame that bears the Potter seal. Harry looked at Doria. Doria looked back with an expression that suggested she had already thought of this, and had been waiting for him to arrive at it himself. Potter Keep, she said, has 12 portrait frames with the seal active. The London townhouse has 3. The Highlands estate has 20, though whether they're in good repair. Can you go to them? Harry said. All of them? And tell me what's there. What shape they're in. Whether anyone's been in them. Doria's portrait smile widened into something very like satisfaction. Give me until this evening, she said. Harry nodded. He moved toward the vault door. He was carrying the grimoire and already he could feel it, something at the edge of his awareness, a faint hum of all the things it contained, all the knowledge waiting to be opened. He thought about Dumbledore feeling the account locks go on. He thought about that moment, wherever Dumbledore was, in whatever comfortable chair or grand office, that moment when something he thought he controlled went still under his hands and told him, without words, that something had changed. He thought, good. One more thing, he said to Ragnarok as they climbed back into the cart. The rental income from the London townhouse. The family currently renting it, they've been there without proper authorization from the actual account holder, which is me. Do we know who they are? Ragnarok consulted a small notebook he produced from his robe. A family named Greengrass. Are they? Harry thought about how to ask what he meant. Have they been taking advantage of it? The situation? Or are they just renters who don't know the money's been going the wrong place? Ragnar considered. By all Gringotts records, the Greengrass family has paid their rent on time and in full for 3 years. The problem is not their payment, but where the payment was redirected. Then they're just renters, Harry said. They don't need to be disrupted. The income just needs to start going where it should. Ragnar made a note. The cart climbed upward through the dark. Harry sat with the grimoire in his lap and the ledger numbers in his head and a plan assembling itself with the quiet, particular efficiency of something that had been wanting to come together for a long time. He thought about Amelia Bones. He thought about Sirius Black. He thought about the letters that needed to be written, and the order in which to write them, and what each one needed to say and not say. The grimoire hummed against his hands. Somewhere above them, in the vast marble hall of Gringotts, the day was continuing and London was continuing and the world that didn't yet know Harry Potter had woken up was continuing with great confidence in its own stability. It had approximately 48 hours of that confidence left. Chapter 3, Teeth and Claws. The letters went out at midnight. Not because midnight was dramatic, Harry didn't think in those terms, but because Ragnar had spent the afternoon assembling the legal documentation and Harry had spent the afternoon reading the first 60 pages of the grimoire, and by the time both of them had finished what they were doing it was late, and late was fine. Late meant the letters arrived on doorsteps and desks in the early hours, before the day had organized itself into positions. Harry had written 3 of them personally, which Ragnar had watched with an expression of mild professional concern that he was too well-mannered to voice. The concern, Harry suspected, was about the handwriting, still large and careful, still obviously a child's, and whether letters written in a child's hand would be taken seriously. Harry had thought about this and decided it was actually useful. A letter in a child's hand saying "I have evidence of financial crimes against my family" landed differently than the same words in an adult's hand. It made people either underestimate or feel immediately guilty, and both reactions were informative. Ragnar sent 6 letters under the Gringotts seal, which was a different category of correspondence entirely, official, legally binding in its implications, the kind of envelope that sat on a recipient's desk and made them feel, before they even opened it, that something was required of them. Harry's 3 letters were to people Ragnar had named and Harry had chosen. He'd spent an hour with Ragnar discussing the list, asking careful questions about each person's motivations, politics, relationships, and where their loyalties sat when they were under pressure. He'd crossed off 4 names and kept 3. Ragnar had watched the process and not interfered, which Harry appreciated. The first letter was to Amelia Bones. The second was to a retired Orin named Alastair Moody, whose file Ragnar described with the economy of someone who deeply respected the subject, effective, paranoid, incorruptible, and deeply hostile to anyone who circumvents legal process. Harry had liked the sound of him immediately. The third was to Minerva McGonagall, which Ragnar had raised an eyebrow at. She was Dumbledore's deputy, he'd pointed out. She was loyal to the man. Harry had said, she was also the one who told Dumbledore leaving me with the Dursleys felt wrong. Ragnar had looked at him, and asked how he knew that. Harry had said he didn't, for certain, but that someone who'd been teaching children for 40 years and had met his parents, and cared about them would have had an opinion about where their child went, and if she'd agreed with Dumbledore she wouldn't have had any doubts worth expressing, and if she'd had doubts she might have said so, and if she'd said so and been overruled, then she was someone who'd been waiting to be right about this for 5 years. Ragnar had made a note. The letters went out by Gringotts Owl, large, black, fast, the kind of owl that didn't wait for a response and didn't get distracted and arrived at its target with the implacability of a legal document served by hand. Harry went to bed and slept well, which surprised him slightly until he realized that for the first time in his memory he'd spent an entire day doing something that mattered, and that was, it turned out, good for sleeping. He woke up to the sound of someone arguing in the corridor. Not arguing with him, arguing outside, 2 voices, one goblin and one human, and the human was saying something in the particular strangled register of controlled panic. Harry got up, put on the clothes that appeared on his chair, different ones today, same dark quality, and opened his door. The corridor held Ragnak, perfectly composed, and a wizard Harry had never seen before. Tall, thin, with the kind of angular face that looked like it had been designed for disapproval and had been thoroughly used for that purpose. His robes were ministry official, the particular shade of plum that Harry would come to associate with bureaucratic self-importance, and he was holding a piece of parchment with both hands in the way people hold things when they want to appear authoritative and feel the opposite. The ministry, he was saying, with clipped professional urgency, has a right to know the whereabouts of the ministry, Ragnak said in the voice he used when he was being very precisely polite in a way that contained a threat. Has no jurisdiction within Gringotts. This is established in Article 7 of the Goblin Wizard Accord, which I can have reproduced for you if the original has not been made available to. The child is a British citizen and a ward of the child, Ragnak said, is a Gringotts ward, which supersedes any claim the ministry might make under domestic magical law. Again, Article 7. He paused. Good morning, he added to Harry. The ministry wizard turned. He looked at Harry, at the small, underfed, perfectly composed 6-year-old standing in a doorway, and his expression did several things rapidly. Surprise. Assessment. Then something that looked briefly like guilt, which Harry stored for later use. Are you Harry Potter? The man said. Yes, Harry said. I'm from the Ministry of Magic. We've had a report. Who filed it? Harry said. The man stopped. I beg your pardon? Who filed the report? Who told the ministry I was here? The man's grip tightened on his parchment. That's not, because if someone told the ministry that a 6-year-old had walked into Gringotts, and the ministry's response is to come take him back to wherever he was rather than ask why a 6-year-old walked into Gringotts in the first place, that's either bad policy or a very specific favor to someone. Harry looked at him without blinking. Which is it? The corridor was very quiet. The ministry wizard looked at Ragnak. Ragnak looked back with the expression of someone who has brought a guest to a dinner and is watching them exceed expectations. I'm here under standard child welfare procedures, the man said, recovering somewhat. When a minor is reported missing, I'm not missing, Harry said. I know exactly where I am. Missing means nobody knows. I know. And now you know. So I'm not missing. He paused. I'm also not going anywhere, because I have legal business with Gringotts that isn't finished. If the ministry wants to know more about that business, they can file a formal inquiry under the Accord. Ragnak can tell you exactly how to do that. He paused again. What's your name? The man blinked. Williamson. Senior Undersecretary to who? A pause that lasted one beat too long. To the minister's office. Okay, Harry said. He looked at Ragnak. Can you document that Mr. Williamson came here this morning, the time and the nature of his inquiry, and who in the minister's office sent him? Already done, Ragnak said. Harry looked back at Williamson. Thank you for coming, he said. You can tell whoever sent you that I'm here voluntarily. I'm legally protected, and any attempt to remove me against my will from Gringotts will be a violation of the Accord, which is an international treaty. He said the last part because Ragnak had mentioned it last night, that the Accord was not a domestic document but had been ratified by magical governments in 14 countries, which gave it a weight that even the British ministry found difficult to argue with publicly. Williamson looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at his parchment, then at Ragnak, then back at Harry, and Harry could see the calculation happening, the weighing of what he'd been sent here to do against what was actually possible and what the political consequences of failure looked like versus the political consequences of attempting something and making it worse. He left. Harry watched him go. Then he looked at Ragnak. Someone told the ministry I was here within. He calculated quickly. Within 12 hours of me arriving. Who knew I was here? Besides the tellers. Gringotts staff do not report to the ministry, Ragnak said. Then someone saw me come in. Or someone saw me in Diagon Alley. Harry thought about the walk from the leaky cauldron. The goblin who'd examined him as he went through the silver doors. Or, he paused. The Ministry has surveillance on Gringotts entries. Do they? Ragnar's expression did something careful. There was a monitoring charm placed on the Gringotts entrance register approximately 3 years ago. We have been in negotiations about its removal. It was placed under Dumbledore's authority as Chief Warlock. Of course it was. Harry thought, of course there's a monitoring charm on the entrance. Of course he'd want to know who came in and what they did. He thought about how long that charm had been there, and what it had reported and who read the reports. He knows I'm here, Harry said. Almost certainly. But he can't come in. He cannot enter these premises with hostile intent. The bank's own wards prevent it. He knows this. So he sent the Ministry instead. Harry thought about this, the speed of it, the particular flavor of it. A man who, within hours of learning Harry had walked into Gringotts, had sent an official from the minister's office rather than coming himself. That was either because he couldn't or because coming himself would look like exactly what it was. He's careful, Harry said. He doesn't do things that look bad. No, Ragnar agreed. He does not. Then we need to make sure everything we do looks correct. Every step. Every document. Every procedure. Harry moved toward the office. Because he's going to find something wrong with how we've done this if he can, and if he can make it look procedurally flawed, then he doesn't have to argue the substance. Ragnar followed him. You've thought about this carefully. I thought about it last night. Harry sat down in his chair. He's not going to come in here shouting. He's going to find a legal mechanism. Or a political one. Something that makes what Gringotts is doing look irregular so people focus on that instead of on what he did. Harry looked at Ragnar across the desk. So how watertight are we? Completely, Ragnar said with a flatness that was its own kind of ferocity. Every document is correctly filed. The reparations clause invocation was processed under full accord protocol. Your identity verification is triple witnessed. He paused. I have been a banker for 230 years. I have never filed an incorrect document. Harry nodded. He believed it. What happens today? He said. With the accounts. The locks. Ragnar sat down. Today at 9 o'clock, the reparations filing became active. As of this morning, all withdrawals from Potter accounts under Dumbledore's signatory code are suspended. His access is revoked. Additionally, Ragnar opened the desk drawer and produced a document. The punitive interest calculation has begun. 20% annually from the date of first unauthorized withdrawal, compounded. What's the current figure? Ragnar looked at the document. With 5 years of principal and compound interest, the sum currently owed to the Potter estate by Albus Dumbledore is approximately 7,800,000 galleons. Harry absorbed this. What happens to his accounts? His personal ones. They are frozen, Ragnar said. Not seized, frozen. He can access them once the reparations are settled. Until then, his Gringotts holdings are under a legal hold. A pause. His liquid assets in Gringotts are considerable. Several 100,000 galleons. He will feel the freeze immediately. Good, Harry said. Then, because he believed in being precise. Not good that I want him to suffer. Good because it means he can't use those assets to pay people. While this is happening. Understood, Ragnar said. They had been talking for about 20 minutes when a knock came at the office door. Not the corridor knock of a staff member but a sharper one, with a purpose to it. Ragnar said come, and the door opened to admit a young goblin clerk who handed Ragnar a sealed envelope and left immediately. Ragnar opened it. He read it. His expression shifted in a way Harry was beginning to learn to read, not surprise exactly, more like the confirmation of something he'd expected to surprise him less than it did. A response from Amelia Bones, he said. Already. What does it say? Ragnar read aloud. Director Ragnar. I have received your communication of this morning regarding the Potter estate irregularities alongside a personal letter from 1H. Potter that I will not pretend did not stop me cold. I am conducting an immediate internal inquiry regarding the circumstances referenced. I require a meeting at your earliest convenience. I will come to Gringotts. Please advise a time. Ragnarok lowered the letter. P.S. I am also separately horrified by the child welfare component of this situation and have already contacted a colleague. More on that at the meeting. Harry thought about the postscript. She's already moving on something. She didn't just file a note, she called someone. Yes. Who does she call when she finds out a child has been? Harry stopped, thought about the word he was going to use, replaced it with something more useful. When she finds out a child has been misplaced. Who's the colleague? Likely someone in the Child Welfare Division of the Ministry. Or possibly. Ragnarok paused thoughtfully. Augusta Longbottom. Who is Frank Longbottom's mother, which makes her the grandmother of your parents' named secondary guardian, and who has considerable influence in the Wizengamot. He looked at Harry. She is also not fond of Albus Dumbledore. Why not? Her son and daughter-in-law were tortured into insanity 2 months after Dumbledore declared the war over and safety restored. She has opinions about the quality of that restoration. Harry thought about Neville Longbottom, living with his grandmother while his parents were in a hospital ward. He thought about 2 families, both named in his parents' will, both destroyed within 2 months of each other, both leaving children without parents. He thought about coincidences and decided he didn't believe in them. Tell Amelia Bones she can come this afternoon, Harry said. And tell her I'll be in the meeting. Ragnarok didn't argue. The morning passed in the particular quality of productive waiting. Harry went back to the grimoire, which was proving to be exactly what it sounded like, a family record, but alive with annotation, every generation adding to the previous one, footnotes arguing with main text across decades, spells recorded and cross-referenced and occasionally argued about in the margins. He found his great-great-grandfather's notes on family magic, the specific kind that was tied to blood and intent and grew stronger the more clearly it was claimed. He found his grandmother's section on Peveril heritage, which was dense and cross-referenced to a separate document that wasn't in the book, and he made a note to ask about that. He found his father's handwriting. It was unmistakable once he'd seen the will signature, the forward-leaning, rapid, ink-slightly heavy hand of someone who wrote quickly because his brain moved faster than his pen. James Potter had added to the grimoire twice, once at age 17, when he'd apparently had strong feelings about a particular protective ward and had annotated his grandfather's notes at length, and once at age 20, in an entry that was shorter and more serious and had clearly been written on a specific occasion. For whoever inherits this after me, I hope it's Harry. I hope we grow old and boring and he inherits this at 45 from a man who embarrassed himself at a Quidditch match and never did anything more consequential than that. But if it's sooner, there are things hidden in the Peveril section that Dumbledore doesn't know about. That's intentional. Be careful with them. Be more careful with the people who want them. Harry read this 3 times. He read it a 3rd time slowly, the way you read things that were written for you by someone who didn't know your face. He thought about his father at 20, writing a contingency note in a family book, hoping he wouldn't need it, leaving it anyway. He turned to the Peveril section. It was written in a different hand than the rest, older, the script itself archaic, though the ink was dark and clear. The content was a genealogy first, the Potter family's descent from the Peverils, the 3 brothers, the legends Harry would later understand the full weight of but that he processed now with the same careful, curious focus he'd given everything else. Objects of power. A cloak of invisibility. A stone. A wand. A note in the margin in his grandmother's hand. Cloak is confirmed in family vault. See 7th account inventory. Stone, location disputed. Wand, see Dumbledore do not. The last 2 words had been underlined 3 times. Harry stared at them for a long time. He thought about what it meant for his grandmother to have written see Dumbledore about something and then underlined do not in the same sentence, and what it meant that the stone's location was disputed, and what it meant that the cloak was confirmed in the family vault, the vault he'd been in that morning. He went back to the vault. Ragnarok sent a junior clerk with him this time, a young goblin called Firik who had the expression of someone very professionally focused and only slightly in awe, which Harry appreciated. The vault opened at his touch the same as before, and Doria's portrait greeted him with the expectant look of someone who'd spent the night traveling to portrait frames and had things to report. "Potter Keep is intact," she said without preamble. "The main rooms are dusty, but the structure is sound. No one has entered in 5 years. The wards are intact and responding to Potter blood. The portraits there have been very bored and are eager to meet you." She paused. "The London townhouse, the Greengrass family has kept well. 3 portraits there, all in good condition, slightly confused about the change in account management. The Highlands estate." She paused differently. "The Highlands estate is extraordinary. The seal has broken, as you and Ragnak surmised. I was able to enter the frames there. Harry, there is a library there that hasn't been opened in 63 years, and it contains things that I cannot describe them to you accurately enough. You need to see it yourself." "We'll go," Harry said, "when this is more settled." "Yes," Doria agreed. "I thought you'd say that." He found the cloak in a chest on the 3rd shelf, folded precisely, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept it as clean and whole as the day it was stored. He picked it up and it fell open in his hands, and the sensation was immediate and unlike anything he had vocabulary for. It was like being looked at by something that had decided to look away, like the air itself forgetting he was in it. He looked at Firik. Firik looked back, or rather, looked at the cloak in Harry's hands, or rather, frowned slightly, because Harry's hands appeared to be floating in midair without Harry attached to them. "Effective," Harry said. "The cloak of invisibility," Firik said, and there was something in his voice that was the goblin equivalent of reverence. "We knew it was here. We had no idea what form it was in." Harry pulled it off his hands. He folded it and held it. He thought about a man who had a note in a family record that said "See Dumbledore. Do not," and who had still, apparently, had the cloak safely in the family vault the whole time. He thought about what that meant. He tucked the cloak inside his jacket. It folded down to almost nothing, he could barely feel it. "Okay," he said to Firik. "I'm ready." Amelia Bones arrived at 2 in the afternoon. She was not what Harry had pictured, and he'd pictured several things. She was broad-shouldered, middle-aged, with a monocle that she wore with complete unself-consciousness, and she walked into Ragnak's office like someone who walked into important rooms regularly, and had long since stopped being impressed by them. She looked at Ragnak, she looked at the documents on the desk, and then she looked at Harry, and her expression did something quick and complicated and then settled. "You're 6, she said. "Yes," Harry said. She sat down. "I've read your letter," she said. "All of it. The specific claim about the will clause, the prohibition on placement with the Dursley family. Do you have documentation?" "The Gringotts registered copy of the will," Ragnak said, and produced it. Amelia Bones read it. She read it the way Harry read things, thoroughly and without rush. She got to the underlined clause. Her jaw tightened. She kept reading. She finished and looked up, and her expression had acquired a particular quality that Harry suspected was what justice looked like when it was in the process of becoming very angry. "He had this document," she said. "He was co-executor. He placed this child with..." She stopped. "Mr. Potter, I need to ask about your living situation. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, but anything you do tell me will be kept strictly. The cupboard under the stairs," Harry said. "My bedroom is the cupboard under the stairs. Number 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. My aunt doesn't like magic and my uncle doesn't believe in feeding me when I do something wrong, which is most of the time." He said this with the same factual flatness as always, and he watched Amelia Bones's face, and he watched the anger in it become something colder and more intentional than anger. "I'm not saying this for sympathy," he added. "I'm saying it because it's relevant, and because you asked." "There are medical records," Ragnak said. "Muggle health records. A visit to a Muggle physician 13 months ago noted, in their terminology, failure to thrive with apparent nutritional deficit. The physician recommended follow-up. No follow-up occurred. Amelia Bones said nothing for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Right." She put the will down. She opened the bag she'd brought, practical, leather, visibly used, and took out her own parchment. The financial crimes and the custodial crimes are technically separate jurisdictions within DMLE. I'm handling both because I'm not handing either of them to anyone I don't personally trust, which narrows the field considerably right now. She looked at Harry. You mentioned Sirius Black in your letter. My godfather, Harry said, who was never tried. I've already pulled the file, Amelia said. Or I've tried to pull the file. The file is. She pressed her lips together briefly. Incomplete. Significantly incomplete. There is no trial transcript, because there was no trial. There is an arrest record and then a commitment order signed by. She stopped. By Dumbledore, Harry said. Amelia Bones looked at him. By Dumbledore, she confirmed, in the tone of someone hearing an instrument play a note they've suspected it of for years. And Bartemius Crouch Sr., who also tried the people who attacked the Longbottoms, Harry said. Very quickly. Amelia looked at him sharply. Yes. I read the grimoire, Harry said. There's a genealogy of alliances in it. The Crouch family and the Dumbledore family have had a political relationship going back to the Wizengamot reforms of 1910. He paused. I'm not saying Crouch is corrupt. I'm saying he and Dumbledore have a long relationship, and they both moved very fast in 1981 and 1982, and the results of that speed put a lot of people in places they were never supposed to be. Amelia Bones studied him with the focused intensity of someone recalibrating their assessment of what they were dealing with. She looked at Ragnok. Ragnok looked back with the composed satisfaction of someone whose recommendation has been validated. The Sirius Black matter, Amelia said carefully, is not something I can resolve quickly. To get him a trial review, a proper one, before the full Wizengamot, I need a petition from a family member or legal representative. I need documented evidence of procedural irregularity, and I need at least 2 Wizengamot members willing to co-sponsor the petition. She paused. I can sponsor it myself from DMLE. But I need one more. Augusta Longbottom, Harry said. Amelia looked at him. Her son was in your parents' will, Harry explained. Secondary guardian. He's in the hospital because of Voldemort's people, who were arrested and tried on the same accelerated timeline as Sirius. If Sirius's process was wrong, then the process for the people who hurt Frank and Alice Longbottom was also potentially wrong. He paused. Augusta Longbottom would have a personal stake in that being examined. And if she's in the Wizengamot, and she cares about law, she might sponsor the petition. Amelia was quiet for a moment. You're asking me to contact Augusta Longbottom. I'm pointing out that she'd want to know, Harry said. What you do with that is your judgment, not mine. Another silence. Amelia Bones had the expression of someone who had come into a meeting expecting to manage a situation and had discovered that the situation was, in fact, managing itself quite capably and mostly needed her professional infrastructure rather than her direction. She seemed to find this more refreshing than threatening, which Harry noted with relief. The immediate priority, she said, is your custody. Legally, right now, your guardians of record are the Dursleys. I need to formally remove that designation and replace it with something legal. She looked at Harry. Given the will's explicit prohibition and the welfare evidence, I can issue an emergency custodial intervention order today. That formally separates you from the Dursleys in the legal record and places you in protected status, pending a permanent guardian being established. She glanced at Ragnok. Which the Gringotts ward designation effectively already is, from your end. Yes, Ragnok said. Good. That's clean then. She made a note. The Dursleys themselves are muggles, Harry said. They didn't really understand what was happening. My uncle is unpleasant, but he's not. He thought about how to say what he meant. He's not the one who put me there. He just didn't refuse. He paused. I'd rather the Muggle authorities deal with them than the magical ones. I don't want it to become. He thought about the word. Political. I don't want it to be part of the thing with Dumbledore, because then it's about the politics, and not about what they did. Amelia looked at him. You're protecting a clear line. I'm protecting the case, Harry said. If the Dursleys are mixed into the Dumbledore prosecution, his people will find a way to muddy both. If they're separate, child welfare is child welfare and financial crime is financial crime, and they're both clear. Amelia Bones made another note, and this note she wrote slightly more slowly than the others, with the deliberate quality of someone making sure to get something right. She put her quill down. She looked at Harry across the desk, at this small, precise, unafraid 6-year-old, and she said, with a directness that Harry respected because it matched his own, Mr. Potter, I want you to know that I am going to pursue this with every resource I have. This is not a small thing I'm deciding to take on. This is career-defining, politically dangerous work that will make me enemies I'll carry for the rest of my professional life. She paused. I want you to know that I know that, and I'm doing it anyway, because what you have shown me today is a systematic abuse of legal and financial power that should horrify anyone who takes the law seriously. Which I do. Another pause. I'm also going to say, and this is separate from the professional, I'm sorry for what your childhood has been. I am personally and genuinely sorry. Harry looked at her. He was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't have something to say but because he was making sure he said the right thing. Thank you, he said, for taking it seriously. He paused. Can I ask, when the formal proceedings start? When Dumbledore is formally notified of the charges? What will he do? In your professional estimate? Amelia thought about this with the genuine consideration it deserved. He will not panic, she said. He'll calculate. He'll determine what he can defend, what he has to let go, and what narrative he can build around the rest. She paused. He will almost certainly argue that he acted in your best interests. That the financial decisions were made with your long-term well-being in mind. That the placement with the Dursleys was for your protection. She paused again. He will be very convincing. He has been doing this for a very long time, and he is very intelligent, and he genuinely believes most of what he says. I know, Harry said. That's why we need everything documented before he has a chance to reframe it. He looked at Ragnock. Has the formal charge documentation gone to the Wisengamot clerk's office? This morning, Ragnock said. And the account freeze, is it public record? Can someone check it? It will appear in the Gringotts public ledger at market close today, Ragnock said. Visible to any account holder who checks. He banks here, Harry said. He'll check. He thought about the dominoes, the account freeze, the custody order, the letters to Moody and McGonagall, the formal Gringotts charges, the Wisengamot filing. All of them moving simultaneously in different directions, none of them avoidable. He thought about the quality of what was coming, how it would feel to be Dumbledore checking his morning correspondence. Good, he thought again. Let him feel it move. It was at that precise moment, as if the thought had conjured a response, that every goblin in the building felt it. Harry felt it too. It came through the floor and through the walls and through the pull in his chest simultaneously, a deep resonant shudder that wasn't seismic but felt like it, the way you feel a large bell not through your ears but through your whole skeleton. Amelia Bones looked up sharply. Ragnock was already on his feet. What was that? Amelia said. Ragnock looked at Harry. His expression was, not alarmed exactly, but awake in a way it hadn't been a moment before. The Potter accounts, he said. The family magic. He looked at Harry more intently. Something has responded. Harry pressed his hand to his chest. The pull was alive in a way it hadn't been even in the vault, not the quiet compass point hum of direction, but something active, something that was not just pointing but pulling, urgently, in the direction of down. The seventh vault, Harry said. He was already moving. He didn't run, running in Gringotts corridors felt structurally inadvisable. But he moved fast, and Ragnar kept pace without asking questions, and behind them Amelia Bones said something short and practical and came too. Down the corridor, through the door, into the shaft where the carts waited. The cart was already at the platform, as if it had known, and they got in and it dropped immediately, faster than before, Harry thought, or maybe it was the urgency that made it feel faster, down through the levels, through the dark, through the ward light, to the deep stone. The vault door was open. Not broken open, swung wide, the way a door opens when it's been unlocked by the right person. The luminescent veins were blazing now, no longer shifting with ambient light but genuinely luminous, and from inside the vault there was a light that was either the lamp light of the corridor nor the chandelier light of the bank above but something older and more interior. Harry walked to the door. He stopped at the threshold. In the center of the vault floor, which he hadn't noticed before because it had been simply stone, there was now a pattern, a design that had been under the surface and was now above it, risen, the way things rise when the right conditions are finally met. A circle. Inside it, 11 pointed lines. In the center, a symbol he'd seen in the grimoire but not yet fully read. The family sigil. The Potter crest, but alive, turning slowly, pulsing with the same rhythm as the door's veins and the same rhythm as the pull in his chest. "What's happening?" Amelia said from behind him, quietly. "I don't know exactly," Harry said. He stepped into the vault. The pull, the thing in his chest, the compass, the hum, the thing that had started it all by dragging a 6-year-old from a cupboard on Privet Drive all the way to a white marble bank in London, responded to the vault's light the way a tuning fork responds to its note. It didn't hurt. It felt, if anything, like relief, like two things that had been kept apart finding each other. The pattern on the floor brightened. The portraits all woke at once, Doria first, then the others, a whole gallery of Potter faces opening their eyes, and the sensation in the vault was like a held breath releasing, like something coming to attention. Doria looked at Harry. Her expression was not surprised. It was ready. "The family magic is acknowledging you," she said. "It's been waiting, not years, Harry. Centuries. The Potter line carries a magical inheritance that gets passed to the heir in full only when the heir claims it. Not just walks into a vault, not just opens a door. Claims it. Knows what they are and what they're owed and stands in the right place and says so." Harry thought about what he'd done over the last 2 days. The question he'd asked in the bank. The signature on the document. The ledgers. The will. The letters. The meeting with Amelia Bones. All of it, not just finding out he was important, but doing things with that importance. Saying this is wrong and then asking what do I do about it. That's what claiming means, Harry said. Not a question. Yes, Doria said. Harry stood in the center of the light and he looked up and he felt the magic that was his settle around him the way a coat settles when you put it on, present, specific, fitting. Not borrowed. Not someone else's. His. He felt, for the first time in his life, large. Not physically. He was still small, still underfed, still wearing goblin-made clothes because he didn't own anything that fit, but in the way that mattered, in the way that the Dursleys had spent 6 years trying to prevent, in the way that Dumbledore had spent 5 years trying to control before it could happen. Large in the sense of present. In the sense of real. In the sense of taking up exactly as much space as he was meant to take up, not 1 inch less. The light peaked and then gentled, settling into the veins of the floor and walls, steady now, warm. The sigil on the floor stopped turning and held. Harry stood in it and breathed. Behind him, Ragnar said something in gobbledygook that Harry's grimoire-fed intuition translated, imprecisely but adequately, as finally. Amelia Bones said very quietly, "What just happened?" "His family magic recognized him," Ragnar said. "He has formally inherited." A pause. "He is now, legally and magically, Lord Potter. Not Heir Potter. Not the young Mr. Potter. Lord Potter. With all that entails." Amelia was quiet for a moment. "He's 6. Yes," Ragnar said. "I'm aware." Harry turned around. He looked at both of them, Amelia with her monocle and her leather bag and her controlled expression of someone recalibrating very quickly, Ragnock with his 230 years of professional composure, and the thing behind it that was beginning, more and more, to look like respect. "Okay," Harry said. "What does Lord Potter have that Harry Potter didn't have this morning?" Ragnock almost smiled. It was the most expressive thing he'd done in 2 days. "A Wisengamot seat," he said. "The right to speak in the full Wisengamot without invitation. 3 additional vote proxies from the associated houses. And standing to personally file charges rather than filing them through Gringotts." He paused. "Which means the charges against Dumbledore are no longer a bank dispute. They are a Wisengamot matter." "And Dumbledore sits on the Wisengamot," Harry said. "He is Chief Warlock," Amelia said. "He chairs it." Harry stood in the light of his family vault and thought about a man who had been the most powerful person in a room for decades, and what it felt like to find out that the room had changed without his permission. "He can't chair a session that's trying him," Harry said. "No," Amelia confirmed. "He cannot." "Then who chairs it?" "The Deputy Chief Warlock," Amelia said. "In Dumbledore's absence, that would be Griselda Marchbanks, who has been on the Wisengamot for 50 years and is famously, professionally impartial." Harry thought about this. He thought about timelines and sequences and what happened next. "We need to move before he finds a way to delay," Harry said. "How fast can you get a Wisengamot session called?" Amelia Bones looked at him. She put her hand in her bag and took out her quill. "Give me 48 hours," she said. "You have them," Harry said. He walked out of the vault. Behind him, the light held steady in the floor. Doria's portrait watched him go with the expression of someone who had kept faith for a very long time and could now, finally, let it become something else. Chapter 4. Chains. The owl from McGonagall arrived at 7 in the morning, 3 days after Harry had walked into Gringotts, and it arrived not as a letter but as a presence. A large, severe-looking barn owl that landed on the windowsill of Harry's guest room as if it had been directed there with military precision, which, given who'd sent it, seemed appropriate. Harry was already awake. He'd been awake for an hour, sitting cross-legged on the bed with the grimoire open across his knees, working through a section on protective ward theory that his great-great-grandfather had annotated with the argumentative thoroughness of someone who'd had strong opinions and no one interesting enough to argue with. He'd found 3 spells in it that he didn't have the vocabulary to understand yet, and had written them in his notebook, a small, plain thing Ragnock had given him on the 2nd day, beside questions he intended to ask someone qualified. He untied the letter from the owl's leg. The owl looked at him with the particular dignity of a bird performing an important function, accepted the piece of toast he offered without any show of gratitude, and left. The letter was short. The handwriting was precise in the way that spoke of someone who'd spent decades writing on blackboards and expected legibility, as a matter of course. "Mr. Potter, I received your letter. I will not insult you by pretending I wasn't expecting something like this, because I was, and the fact that it has taken this long is something I intend to think hard about for the rest of my life. I have several things to say that cannot be put in a letter. I would like to come to Gringotts today if that is acceptable. I would also like you to know, before we meet, that I knew your mother, and I knew your father, and I'm sorry. I should have done more. McGonagall. Harry read it twice. He folded it and put it in the notebook, between 2 pages. He thought about I should have done more and what it meant that she'd written it before they met, before he'd said a single thing to her in person, which meant she'd been carrying it without his help. He wrote back 1 line, "Come at 10. H. Potter." He sent it with the Gringotts internal owl system, which Firik had shown him and which was faster and more reliable than anything Harry had used before, not that he'd used owls before, not that he'd used much of anything before. He got dressed and ate breakfast and was in Ragnock's office by 8:30. Ragnock was already there. Ragnock was, Harry had come to understand, always already there. The man seemed to operate on a schedule that predated the concept of morning by several hours. The desk had 3 new documents on it, weighted down with the polished stones, and Ragnarok was writing something in a script that moved too fast for Harry to follow. The Gringotts session, Harry said, sitting down. Amelia Bones said 48 hours. She filed this morning, Ragnarok said, not looking up. The session has been called for tomorrow. 2 in the afternoon. He finished what he was writing, set the quill down, and looked at Harry. Griselda Marchbanks is chairing. She is 87 years old and has the patience of someone who has seen everything and the impatience of someone who has seen everything twice. Has she been told what the session is about? She has been told it concerns formal charges against the Chief Warlock, filed jointly by the Potter Estate and the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. A pause. She described her reaction to this information as long overdue, according to Amelia's note. Harry filed that. What about the Moody letter? Has he responded? Last night. Verbally, he came to the bank at 9 in the evening. Ragnarok's expression held something that might have been, in someone with a larger emotional vocabulary, amusement. He introduced himself by checking for imposters, which took 11 minutes and involved a flask. He then asked to see every piece of evidence we had and spent 2 hours reading it. And he left saying, verbatim, I'll be at the Gringotts session. If someone tries to stop me coming in, they'll regret it. He also left a note for you. Ragnarok produced it, a small square of parchment, dense with writing that leaned at aggressive angles. Harry read it. Potter, good instincts getting out of that house. Better instincts coming here. Eternal vigilance. Don't trust anyone without checking. I'll have your back tomorrow, not because anyone asked me to, but because this is the most legally irregular mess I've seen in 30 years and I was an aura for 30 years. A. Moody. P.S. The cloak is yours. Keep it close. Harry looked at the last line. He looked at Ragnarok. How does he know about the cloak? Alastair Moody, Ragnarok said, knows about most things. A pause. He was the senior aura on the Godric's Hollow scene in 1981. He saw the house. He may know more about that night than is in any official record. Harry thought about this and added it to the list of things he needed to talk to Moody about properly, when there was time, when the immediate machinery had done what it needed to do. He was developing a long list of those conversations, the ones that were about the past, about his parents, about the night at Godric's Hollow, and what had really happened and what various people knew about it. He was keeping them in a separate mental category from the immediate work, not because they didn't matter, they mattered enormously, but because the immediate work had to go first. You couldn't find out who you were until you'd secured the space to exist in. McGonagall is coming at 10, Harry said. I know, Ragnarok said. I received her confirmation an hour ago. He paused. She is bringing something. She didn't specify what, but she asked about a suitable space for a private conversation. A pause. I've prepared the secondary conference room. Harry nodded. He looked at the documents on the desk. What are those? The detailed forensic account analysis. Every withdrawal itemized and cross-referenced to its stated purpose, with our assessment of whether the stated purpose was genuine. Ragnarok nudged the top document toward him. The summary is on the first page. In total, of 4,200,000 galleons withdrawn, approximately 300,000 went to purposes that could be argued as genuinely related to estate administration, in a very liberal interpretation. The remaining 3,900,000, no legitimate purpose can be established. Harry looked at the number. He thought about it not in terms of wealth, he still couldn't really frame that, but in terms of what it represented. 5 years of deliberate, careful, labeled theft. Not impulse. Not necessity. Choice. He didn't need the money, Harry said. Dumbledore is independently wealthy, Ragnarok confirmed. He has his own holdings, his Hogwarts salary, royalties from several published works. A pause. This was not about need. Then it was about control, Harry said. Keeping the estate controlled. Making sure I had nothing. He thought about it. If I grew up not knowing about magic, not knowing about my family's money or standing, then when I turned 11 and got my Hogwarts letter, what would I have been? I'd have been a child from a Muggle family with nothing. Dependent on whoever handed me information first. Ragnar said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. He'd have been the one to tell me I was special. Harry continued. He'd have been the one to explain the magical world to me. All of it on his terms. I'd have been grateful. He said the word with a precision that made it land the way he meant it to. He'd have had everything. My loyalty, my trust, my access to the Potter holdings, all through me but shaped by him. He paused. And whatever he needs me for. The thing he's keeping me for. I'd have walked into it without knowing it was a trap. The room was quiet. Ragnar said. Yes. And Sirius being in Azkaban is part of it. Harry said. Because Sirius would have told me. He knew my parents, he knew the politics, he knew Dumbledore. Even if Sirius had only told me half of what he knew, it would have been enough to make me ask questions. So Sirius had to be removed. Yes, Ragnar said again. Harry sat back. He was thinking now not about logistics but about the shape of the thing, the architecture of what Dumbledore had built over 5 years, how each piece supported the others, how carefully it had been constructed. He was thinking about what it meant to plan that carefully, to maintain that many moving parts over that many years, to keep every element in place with the patience and precision of someone who thought in decades rather than months. He thought, you don't do all that unless what you're building toward is very large. The hearing tomorrow, Harry said. I want to speak. Not just have Amelia and Ragnar present the evidence. I want to speak. Ragnar looked at him steadily. You understand that will be significant. In terms of how it's perceived. You are 6 years old and you will be addressing the full Wizengamot. I know. Dumbledore's allies will try to use your age to dismiss. I know that too, Harry said. Let them try. He paused. I'm Lord Potter. I have a Wizengamot seat. I have legal standing to speak. Any attempt to prevent that will itself be a procedural violation. He looked at Ragnar. And honestly, I want them to see me. All of them. I want the Wizengamot to look at me and think about what they know about where I've been for 5 years and who put me there. Ragnar was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I will have your seat prepared. At 10:05, a knock came at the door of the secondary conference room, which was slightly warmer and less austere than Ragnar's office, with a round table and chairs that had been arranged in a way that suggested conversation rather than negotiation. Ragnar had been thoughtful about it in the way he was thoughtful about most things, which was quietly and without making a point of it. Harry opened the door himself. Minerva McGonagall was taller than he'd expected, which wasn't a useful observation since he hadn't known what to expect, but she was tall and spare and severe in the same way the barn owl had been severe, a dignity that was the product of standards, not posture. She was wearing dark green robes and her hair was up and she had a bag over one arm and she looked at Harry with eyes that were sharp and complicated and that did something when they found his face, something quick and private that she controlled almost immediately but not quite fast enough. She looked like someone who had been dreading and needing this moment simultaneously. Mr. Potter, she said. Professor McGonagall, Harry said. Come in. She sat across from him. Ragnar took the third chair and was professionally invisible in the way he managed when he wanted to be. McGonagall put the bag on the table and didn't open it immediately. She looked at Harry with the direct, assessing look of someone who taught children and had therefore developed an accurate eye for what was actually happening inside them as opposed to what they were presenting. Your letter, she said, was the most precise and troubling piece of correspondence I've received in my career. And I've been at Hogwarts for 41 years. Did you know? Harry said. Not aggressively. Just directly. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. I knew that I disagreed with the placement. I told Dumbledore so the night he placed you there. I had been watching the Dursleys for a day and I did not like what I saw. She paused. He told me the reasons were security-related. That the blood wards, the magic created by your mother's sacrifice, required you to live with a blood relative to maintain. That it was temporary. That he was monitoring the situation closely. Another pause. I believed him. Did you check? Harry said. A very short silence. No, she said. I didn't check. She said it without excusing it. I should have. I knew that even then, and I chose to trust his judgment over my own, that is not something I will make peace with easily. She met his eyes directly. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to do what I should have done 5 years ago. Harry looked at her. He thought about what it meant to trust someone so completely that you didn't check. He thought about what Dumbledore had done with people's trust over decades. Taken it, applied it, used it as a building material. McGonagall wasn't the only one. She was just the one sitting in front of him. What's in the bag? Harry said. McGonagall opened it. She produced a photograph. She placed it on the table and turned it to face him and sat back, and Harry looked at it. It was moving, the way photographs apparently moved in the magical world, which he'd known intellectually from 2 days of reading but hadn't experienced in this particular way. 2 people. A man who was tall with dark, untidy hair and glasses and who was laughing about something, his whole face involved in the laugh, the way some people's faces fully committed to whatever they were feeling. A woman with red hair and eyes that were green. His green. Looking at the camera with a warmth that wasn't performed and an arm around the man's waist, and they were both young. They were so young, young in the way that people are young before they understand what's coming. Harry looked at them for a long time. I took that in their 7th year, McGonagall said. Her voice was careful with something. James had just done something ridiculous on a broomstick and Lily was pretending to still be annoyed about it. A pause. He was the most gifted flyer I've ever taught. And she was. Another pause. She was extraordinary. In ways that had nothing to do with her grades, though they were exceptional. Harry put his finger on the photograph. His father laughed again, on loop, with the specific fullness of someone who didn't know to hold anything back. His mother rolled her eyes and smiled. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you for bringing this." "I have more," McGonagall said. "At Hogwarts. I have kept things over the years. Things I thought might." She stopped. "I didn't know if I'd ever be able to give them to you. I hoped." Harry looked up from the photograph. "I want to ask you about something." From the grimoire. He paused, organizing the thought. "There's a note about a wand. A specific wand. And it says, see Dumbledore and then do not." He watched her face. "Do you know what that means?" McGonagall's expression shifted into something carefully neutral, which was itself a kind of answer. "There are objects associated with the Peveril line," she said. "And there are theories. Dumbledore has spent considerable time pursuing certain historical interests." She paused. "More than that I don't know with certainty. I know he has a particular wand. I know he acquired it after Grindelwald." Harry thought about that. He thought about after Grindelwald and see Dumbledore. Do not and the conversation he'd had with Ragnarok about Voldemort, and what remained of him, and what Dumbledore knew and didn't know. He added it to the list of future conversations. "Okay," he said. "The Wisengamot session is tomorrow at 2. McGonagall nodded. "I'll be there." "Whose side are you on?" Harry asked. Not rudely, as a genuine operational question. McGonagall looked at him directly. "Yours," she said. "Unequivocally. Even knowing what it costs you professionally?" "Especially then," she said. She paused. "I've spent 41 years being good at my job and loyal to this school. I've watched Dumbledore lead it, and trusted that the leadership was sound. Learning that it wasn't, in this specific way, doesn't change my opinion of everything he is. But it changes what I'm willing to do next." Harry picked up the photograph and held it for a moment. He thought about what was adequate to say and landed on, My mother specifically said not to put me with the Dursleys. In the will. Specifically. He paused. I think she knew him well enough to think it might happen. I think she was trying to leave a record of the fact that she disagreed. He looked at McGonagall. She was smart. She was one of the brightest students I've taught in 4 decades. McGonagall said, and she said it with the plain directness of someone stating a fact that contains enormous emotion but is stated factually out of respect for it. She would have been extraordinary. She would have changed things. A pause. You already are. Harry put the photograph in his notebook, between his letter from McGonagall and his note from Moody. The notebook was becoming thick with things. The afternoon broke into fragments of productive work. Amelia Bones sent a summary of the custody order, filed, signed, effective immediately, the Dursleys' guardianship formally severed in the magical legal record. She attached a separate note. Muggle Social Services has been anonymously informed about the welfare situation at No. 4 Privet Drive. They will visit within 48 hours. I've kept it clean, as you asked? Harry read this and felt something settle, not just the satisfaction of a planned thing working, but something more specific, something about the separation between using the right system for the right problem and making everything political. He'd been right about that. Clean lines. Moody's file on the Sirius Black case arrived by Goblin courier at 3, not a letter, a file, thick and bound, with a note on the front that said read this. Then tell me it was legal. I dare you. Harry read it cover to cover in an hour and a half, and it was not legal in at least 4 separate, clearly documentable ways, 2 of which were directly traceable to ministry decisions made on the day of Sirius's arrest and signed by people who were still in government. He was partway through writing his analysis notes when Ferric knocked and came in. There's someone at the door, Ferric said. His expression, normally flat with professional neutrality, had acquired a slight quality of uncertainty. He says he won't say his name, exactly. He said to tell you that he taught defense against the dark arts in a year that wasn't good for anyone and that you know what that meant. Harry stared at him. That doesn't mean anything to me, he said. I'm 6. I haven't gone to school yet. Ferric looked genuinely apologetic. He also said he had information about the night your parents died that he hasn't given to anyone. He said he owes a debt. To the Potters. He paused. He is young for a wizard. Mid-20s. He looks like he hasn't slept in several years. Harry sat back and thought about who owed his parents a debt and was young and hadn't slept. He thought about 1981 and what had happened and the people adjacent to it. He thought about the accelerated trials and the people who'd been convicted. He thought about Ragnarok's according to official records. Let him in, Harry said, with a Gringotts witness present. The man who came in was, indeed, young, 25 or 26, with the kind of face that would have been attractive under different conditions and was currently arranged in an expression of someone who had been rehearsing a conversation they were terrified to have. His robes were clean but had the quality of someone who wore cleanliness as a discipline rather than a comfort. He stood in the doorway and looked at Harry and then looked at the goblin witness in the corner, and then looked back at Harry, and the calculation on his face resolved into something simpler and harder. I'm Regulus, he said. Regulus Black. Harry looked at him. You're supposed to be dead, Harry said. Regulus Black, who was, according to every official record, deceased since 1979, looked at the 6-year-old Lord Potter with an expression that was equal parts relief and something that had been compressed for a very long time. Yes, he said. That was deliberate. He sat down. He told it quickly and without decoration, the way people tell things they've been holding too long, the story coming out with the quality of water finding the lowest point. He had been a Death Eater. He had discovered something about Voldemort, something about how the man had made himself harder to kill, something hidden, something dark and specific that Harry filed under Get Ragnarok in here for later discussion. He had staged his death with the help of his house elf. He had spent the last 7 years gathering information, hiding, watching, waiting for a moment when the information would matter to someone who could do something with it. "My brother," he said. "Sirius." His voice did something when he said the name. "I know he was arrested. I know he was charged with betraying James and Lily. He didn't." He looked at Harry directly. "He didn't do it. I know who did. I have evidence. I've had it for years, but without someone to bring it to who wouldn't." He stopped. "Everyone who could have used it was either Dumbledore's or too afraid to move against Dumbledore. I've been watching for someone who wasn't." "Peter Pettigrew," Harry said. Regulus stared at him. "He was the secret keeper," Harry said. "Not Sirius. They switched at the last minute and kept it secret because Sirius thought he was too obvious a choice. He was partly reconstructing from the grimoire and partly from Moody's file, which had contained, in one careful footnote, a note Moody had written himself, Pettigrew's body never found. Inconsistent with the explosion account. Never pursued. Why not? Pettigrew was the one who told Voldemort. And Sirius went after him, and Pettigrew faked his own death and framed Sirius for it. And nobody looked closely because looking closely would have meant finding that Sirius wasn't guilty, and someone in that process didn't want that found." He paused. "Where is Pettigrew now?" Regulus Black looked at him with the expression of someone who has spent years with a story and just watched someone else tell it back in under a minute. "He's alive," he said. "Living as a rat. Literally, he's an animagus, unregistered. He's been hiding." "Do you know where?" "I've been tracking him," Regulus said. "I know the general area. I don't have a specific location yet. He moves." Harry looked at the goblin witness. "Is there a way to trace an unregistered animagus through their magical signature?" The goblin, an older female teller who'd been standing in the corner with professional invisibility, blinked. "Gringotts has detection instruments for unusual magical signatures," she said carefully. "If you had a comparative baseline, something that had the person's magical signature from before the transformation, Sirius Black's trial record," Harry said. "If there's a magical signature on file from his arrest, there would be," she said. "Ministry arrest records include a magical signature scan. It's standard. And if Pettigrew registered as Sirius's rat companion at some point, if there's any record of him in that form associated with Sirius's history, there might be," she said. "I can check the Hogwarts familiar registration records. If a rat was registered as belonging to the Pettigrew family," Regulus said suddenly. He looked alert, remembering something. Before, when we were all students, he had a rat. He had a rat as his familiar, and it lived for too long. Far longer than a normal rat." He paused. 12 years. "A 12-year-old rat," Harry said. "That was him," Regulus said. "That was Pettigrew already hiding." Harry looked at this for a moment. The image of a man who had betrayed his friends and gotten them killed, who had framed the survivor for his own crime, who had then spent years hiding as a rat in the very world he'd helped destroy. He didn't feel contempt exactly. Something cleaner than contempt. "Okay," he said. "We need to find him before the Wisengamot session tomorrow. Because if we walk into that session with evidence that Sirius didn't do it, and we can also say we know where Pettigrew is, that changes the shape of the whole thing." "I'll contact Amelia," Ragnarok said from the doorway, where he had appeared at some point during the last 10 minutes with the quiet of someone who had a habit of being in the right place. He had clearly been listening. "How long have you been there?" Harry said. "Long enough," Ragnarok said, with composure. "She needs to know about Pettigrew before tomorrow. A capture order needs to be prepared." "Moody," Harry said. "Tell Moody. If you want someone to actually catch a man who's been hiding as a rat for 7 years, you want the Auror who spent 30 years on this." He looked at Regulus. "Will you work with him?" Regulus Black, dead for 7 years, carrying a secret too long, sitting in a goblin bank across from a 6-year-old who had just rearranged his entire understanding of what was possible in the next 24 hours, looked at Harry Potter and said, "Yes." Obviously, yes. Ragnar, Harry said. Regulus needs somewhere to stay. He can't go back wherever he's been. There are additional guest rooms, Ragnar said. And he needs. Harry looked at Regulus. Are you safe? Legally? The dead can't be prosecuted, technically, but if you come back to life they might try to. We can file a status clarification with Diagon, Ragnar said. Under the circumstances, given the evidence Regulus carries about Voldemort's methods, which I would very much like to hear in full, at the earliest opportunity, I suspect Amelia Bones will find his existence more useful than inconvenient. Regulus looked at Ragnar. Then at Harry. You, he said carefully to Harry, are the most alarming 6-year-old I've ever encountered. I've had a productive few days, Harry said. That night, the grimoire open on his knees and the photograph of his parents on the table beside him, Harry thought about tomorrow. He thought about the shape of it, the Wizengamot chamber, the rows of seats, the formal procedures, Griselda Marchbanks in the chair. He thought about Dumbledore, who by now knew about the account freeze and the custody order and the Wizengamot filing and probably had a very clear picture of what was coming. He thought about what Dumbledore would do. The man was not a panicker. He was not going to collapse under the pressure of being charged. He was going to find the most defensible position available to him and stand in it with the practiced, authoritative calm of someone who had been the most powerful man in the room for 50 years and intended to remain so. He was going to have explanations. He was going to have reasons. He was going to look at the Wizengamot, people who knew him, who owed him favors, who had watched him defeat Grindelwald and lead them through 2 wizarding wars, and he was going to give them something they could use to doubt the charges. Harry thought, what does he say? He'd told Amelia. Dumbledore would argue he'd acted in Harry's best interests. He'd argue the Blood Wards. He'd argue security. He'd argue that a child in the magical world with Harry's fame would be in constant danger, that obscurity had been his best protection, that everything Dumbledore had done had been to keep Harry safe until Harry was old enough to enter the magical world properly, on his terms, guided appropriately. It was, Harry thought, a genuinely strong argument. It was the kind of argument that sounded like love if you didn't look too closely at it. It would resonate with people who were afraid, and Wizarding Britain had been afraid for a long time, the kind of afraid that made people grateful for authority rather than suspicious of it. He had to give them something that punctured it. Not just the legal evidence, Amelia and Ragnar had that covered. He had to give them something that made the argument feel wrong, not just prove it was wrong. He had to speak in a way that a room full of people who trusted Dumbledore for decades would look at and think, this is what that trust costs. He picked up the photograph. His father laughed. His mother rolled her eyes and then smiled. He thought about the underlined clause in the will. Under no circumstances. He thought about his mother sitting down on the last day of her life and writing those words and underlining them and knowing, on some level, that they needed to be underlined, that someone would look for a reason to put him there anyway, and she wanted the record to be absolutely clear. He thought about what you said to a room full of witches and wizards who'd spent 5 years not asking where Harry Potter was or whether he was all right. He thought about what you didn't need to say because the truth said it for you. He closed the grimoire. He put the photograph face up on the bedside table, where his parents continued their private loop of joy and ease. I'll tell them, he said to the photograph, which wasn't exactly talking to his parents but wasn't exactly not either. I'll tell them what she wrote. I'll let the will speak. His father laughed. His mother smiled. Harry turned off the lamp and lay in the dark and thought about chains, the ones that had been built around him before he was old enough to understand, the ones that had held Sirius in a cell without trial, the ones that had kept Regulus dead and Pettigrew safe and the truth quiet for 5 years. He thought about what it took to break them, not force, exactly. Precision. Knowing where they were weakest. Finding the single link that, removed, made the whole structure fall. He'd found it 3 days ago, walking into a bank with a question. Tomorrow he'd pull. He slept. The morning of the Wizengamot session, Moody sent word at 6, we have him. Pettigrew. Caught him in Birmingham, in a sewer, which is where he belongs. He is currently in ministry custody, screaming about being innocent, which guilty people do. He will be available for testimony if needed. Constant vigilance. Harry read this and felt something shift in the architecture of what he'd been building, the last piece moving into place, the structure becoming complete. He dressed. He ate. He went to Ragnar's office, where Ragnar was already dressed in robes that had the formal quality of something brought out for serious occasions, and he looked at the director of Gringotts, and the director of Gringotts looked back at him. "Ready?" Ragnar said. Harry thought about a cupboard under the stairs. He thought about a coin in the toe of his shoe. He thought about a pull in his chest that had dragged him from Surrey to London to a white marble bank where someone had finally, for the first time, let him see the truth about himself and his family, and what had been done to both. He thought about his parents' faces, laughing, in a photograph he hadn't had 4 days ago. "Yes," he said. They walked through the bank, the grand marble hall, the goblins at their counters, the business of an ordinary morning carrying on around an extraordinary moment, and out through the bronze doors and down the white marble steps into Diagon Alley, where the late morning light fell on cobblestones and shop fronts and a world that didn't yet know what today was going to be. Harry Potter, who was 6 years old and lord of 3 ancient houses and the boy who had survived something impossible and was about to do something unprecedented, walked down the alley with Ragnar beside him and the cloak in his pocket, and his parents' photograph in his notebook, and the full weight of everything he'd learned and claimed and built in 4 days sitting behind his sternum like a second heartbeat. He didn't look nervous. He was not nervous. He was thinking about chains and where they broke. Chapter 5. The Weight of Crowns. The Ministry of Magic was underground, which Harry thought said something about it, though he hadn't decided exactly what yet. They arrived via a Gringotts arranged flu connection, one of the formal ones, used for official business, that deposited you in a designated arrivals chamber rather than tumbling you into a fireplace. Harry had never used flu before. He stepped out of the green flame into the arrivals chamber, brushing ash off his jacket with the composure of someone who'd decided in advance not to find it undignified, which was the same composure he brought to most new things. The atrium was enormous and gold and had a fountain in the center that Harry looked at for exactly 2 seconds before deciding he had more useful things to look at. What he looked at instead was the people. The witches and wizards moving through the atrium with the particular mix of hurry and self-importance that characterized people in institutional buildings. He watched them notice him, or rather, he watched them notice Ragnar, since a goblin director in formal robes was genuinely unusual in the ministry atrium, and then follow Ragnar's positioning to the small figure beside him, and then do the double take of people who'd expected Harry Potter to be a concept and had found instead a person. He let them look. Looking was fine. Amelia Bones met them at the lifts. She was in formal D'Amelie robes, deep blue, the silver badge at her collar catching light, and she had the contained, purposeful energy of someone who had been moving fast for 48 hours and intended to move fast for at least 48 more. Beside her was a woman Harry hadn't met who had the upright posture of someone who'd decided years ago that the world would meet her standards rather than the reverse, white hair pulled back severely, black robes with a small vulture on her hat that was either genuinely eccentric or a deliberate signal Harry didn't have enough context to read yet. "Lord Potter," Amelia said. "This is Augusta Longbottom." Augusta Longbottom looked at Harry with the assessing directness of someone who'd raised a child alone and had consequently developed an unforgiving eye for what children were actually made of as opposed to what they presented. She looked at him for 3 full seconds. "You wrote to Amelia instead of writing to me directly," she said. "I didn't know you yet," Harry said. "Writing to people I don't know without an intermediary seemed presumptuous." Augusta Longbottom's expression didn't warm exactly. It was the kind of face that had been arranged too long for severity to relax quickly, but something in it settled, the way a judge's expression settles when a witness says something unexpectedly precise. "Your mother," she said, "was at a herbology symposium with Alice 3 weeks before Godric's Hollow. Alice came home and said Lily Potter was the most formidable woman she'd ever met, and she intended to be friends with her for 50 years. She paused. I have co-sponsored the trial petition for Sirius Black. Thank you, Harry said. I'm not doing it for sentiment, she said. I'm doing it because the process was corrupt, and my son's case was processed by the same hands, and I want to know what was done, and who did it, and I want it done correctly. She paused again. But also, yes, some sentiment. Your mother would want this. Harry nodded. He thought about Alice Longbottom in a hospital ward, not knowing that the two families her husband had been meant to protect had found each other in a ministry atrium, 5 years late and moving at speed. They took the lift down. The Wiesengemot chamber was circular and tiered, the seats rising in concentric rings around a central floor space that held a chair and a podium and, today, a formal table where the evidence documentation had been laid out in the particular careful arrangement of materials that were about to be used for something that mattered. Harry took it in the way he took in most rooms, quickly, thoroughly, filing the geography. The chamber was about half full when they arrived, and the quality of noise in it was the compressed, careful noise of people who were trying to look like they didn't know exactly how significant the next 2 hours were going to be. He found his seat. The Potter seat. He hadn't been certain it would be physically there, labeled, available, but it was, in the third tier on the left, a chair that was slightly different from the others the way important chairs often were, and it had been there unoccupied for 5 years, and when Harry sat in it the magic in it recognized him the same way the vault had, the same way everything in his family's keeping recognized him, without drama, without fanfare, simply and completely. He sat. He looked at the chamber. Dumbledore was already there. He was in the frontier, which was where the senior Wiesengemot members sat, in robes of deep purple that had the quality of something worn for significance rather than ceremony. He was an old man, very old, Harry realized seeing him for the first time in person, the kind of old that was enormously present rather than diminished by it. White hair, white beard, half-moon spectacles. He had the face of someone who had been kind so often and so publicly that the kindness had settled into the architecture of his features. His eyes, which were blue and very sharp, found Harry the moment Harry sat down. They looked at each other across the chamber for a moment. Harry looked back without blinking. He was not afraid. He was aware of the man's age, his experience, his intelligence, his decades of accumulated authority and trust. He was aware that almost everyone in this room had looked at Albus Dumbledore for most of their adult lives and seen safety. He was aware that what he was about to ask the room to do, to look at that face and see something other than safety, was genuinely hard. Dumbledore's expression was complex. Harry read it as best he could, surprise carefully managed, concern professionally displayed. And underneath those, something that was either of them. Something that was looking at Harry with a quality Harry recognized because he used it himself. Assessment. What does he know? How much? Can it be managed? Harry thought, all of it. Everything. No. He looked away first, not out of discomfort but out of disinterest. He had more important things to look at. He found Ragnarok in the observers section. Goblins didn't hold Wiesengemot seats but had formal observer status under the Accord, and Ragnarok was there with 2 junior goblins carrying documentation cases. He found McGonagall in the gallery above, in the section reserved for invited witnesses, sitting with the upright composure of someone who had made a decision and was not going to let it wobble. He found Moody near the back, in the gallery but positioned near an exit, with the habitual awareness of someone who calculated egress before comfort. He found Regulus Black in the far corner of the observers section, hooded, quiet, looking at the back of his brother's empty chair in the prisoner's dock, the dock where Sirius would sit when he was brought in, which hadn't happened yet. The chamber filled. The noise compressed further. At exactly 2 o'clock, Griselda Marchbanks entered. She was, as Ragnarok had described, 87. And she was exactly the kind of 87 that had no patience for being treated as if that number meant limitation. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd stopped wasting motion decades ago, took the chair, arranged her materials, and looked at the chamber over her spectacles with an expression that said she had read every document, formed every relevant opinion, and would be taking no nonsense in any direction. This session of the Wizengamot is called to order, she said in a voice that was smaller than expected and carried further than it should have. We are convened to hear formal charges filed by the Potter estate and the Department of Magical Law Enforcement against Chief Warlock Albus Dumbledore, and to consider a petition for trial review in the matter of Sirius Orion Black. She paused. Due to the direct involvement of the Chief Warlock as the primary respondent, he is recused from chairing. I am chairing. Is there objection to this? Silence. Good, Marchbanks said. Head of D. Melly Bones, you'll present the primary evidence. Gringotts Director Ragnarok will present the financial documentation. Lord Potter has requested and been granted the right to address the chamber. The respondent will have opportunity to speak after the evidence has been presented in full. We will observe every procedure correctly. I will not have this session challenged on technical grounds. She looked over her spectacles at the room with the flatness of a woman who had seen technical challenges used as weapons and was comprehensively uninterested in facilitating it. Let's begin. Amelia stood. She was economical and precise, which was exactly right. She didn't dramatize, didn't editorialize, didn't reach for emotion. She presented the facts with the clean efficiency of someone who understood that the facts themselves were dramatic enough, and anything added would only give the defense something to argue with. She presented the custody illegality first, the will, the clause, the placement. She presented the financial records second, the withdrawals, the dates, the labels, the total. She presented the comparison between what had been claimed, guardianship expenses for a child's care, and what had actually happened, which was the Gringotts medical record showing a malnourished child and the Muggle welfare report showing a child sleeping in a cupboard. She spoke for 20 minutes. The chamber got quieter as she went, not the silence of agreement, but the silence of people confronting something they hadn't let themselves look at directly before. When she sat down, Ragnarok presented the financial documentation. He was more technical and more thorough and took longer, and Harry watched the faces of Wizengamot members as the figures mounted. The compound interest calculation, the charitable trust manipulation, the specific allegation of using Potter family money to fund Dumbledore's political sphere. Several faces in the upper tiers had gone still in the way that faces went still when something was worse than expected. Then it was Dumbledore's turn to hear the charges formally, which he did. He listened with his hands folded and his expression grave and composed, and when Marchbanks asked if he understood the charges he said yes, and his voice was exactly what Harry had expected, measured, warm, the voice of someone who was sorry to be here and sorrier still that things had become so complicated. I'll speak after Lord Potter, Dumbledore said. With the chamber's permission. I think it's appropriate for the child to speak first if he wishes. He said it with a generosity that was perfectly pitched, the implication of an old man deferring graciously to a young one, which in a different context would have looked simply kind and in this context was its own kind of move, positioning himself as the reasonable adult after whatever the 6-year-old managed to say. Harry had seen that coming. He stood up before anyone could respond. He stood up from the Potter seat, in the chamber of the Wizengamot, and he was small, visibly, obviously small, a thin 6-year-old in dark goblin-made clothes that fit him properly for the first time, standing in a tier of seats built for adults. And the chamber looked at him, and for a moment the quality of the silence changed into something that was almost pain. He saw it move across faces, the recognition of what they were looking at. Not a symbol, not a concept, not the boy who lived. A child. A specific, present, underfed child who had walked into a bank 4 days ago and asked a question. He walked down to the central floor. Nobody stopped him. He stood at the podium and looked at the chamber, all of it, the tiers of faces, the observers' gallery, the formal table with its documents, Marchbanks in her chair looking at him over her spectacles with an expression that had gone beyond assessment into something quieter. He didn't have notes. He hadn't prepared a speech in the formal sense. He'd thought about it, yes, lying in the dark the night before, but preparing a speech assumed you knew exactly what you were going to say, and Harry had found, in 4 very educational days, that the best conversations happened when you knew what you were trying to achieve and let the words find their own way there. "My name is Harry Potter," he said. His voice was clear in the acoustic of the chamber, smaller than Marchbanks's had been but carrying in the same way. "I'm 6. I found out I was a wizard 4 days ago." The chamber was completely still. "I found out other things too," he said. "I found out my parents left a will that said very clearly, they underlined it, that I wasn't to be placed with my aunt's family because it was a hostile environment." He paused. "I lived in a cupboard there for 5 years. It was the small one under the stairs. The one with the broken light." He said this without self-pity and without performance, the same way he said everything, and he watched that flatness land harder in the room than crying would have. "I found out that someone had been taking money from my family's accounts the whole time. Not a little. Nearly 8 million galleons with interest. Taking it and labeling it as care for me, as administration of my estate, as charitable donations in my parents' names." He looked at Dumbledore for a moment, one moment direct, then away. "My parents died 6 weeks before the first withdrawal." He pulled out the notebook. He opened it to the page he'd pressed a photograph between, but he didn't take the photograph out. He took out the piece of paper beside it, the one with his handwritten copy of the will clause, copied in his large, careful handwriting from the Gringotts registered document. "I want to read you something," he said. "From my parents' will. Dated October 31st, 1981. The day they died." He found the line. "Under no circumstances is the minor child Harry James Potter to be placed with Petunia Disley née Evans, as this placement would remove him from the magical world and expose him to a known hostile environment." He lowered the page. "They wrote that on the last day of their lives. They sat down and they wrote that and they underlined it, and I think they underlined it because they were afraid someone would find a reason to ignore it, and they wanted the record to be clear." The chamber was so quiet that when someone in the upper tiers shifted in their seat it was audible. "I'm not standing here because I want anyone to feel sorry for me," Harry said. "I don't need that. I'm standing here because my parents tried to protect me and the person who was supposed to make sure their wishes were followed." He stopped, not for effect but because he was making sure the next words were right. He read that will. He was co-executor. He read the underlined part. And he put me there anyway. He folded the paper. He put it back in the notebook. He looked at the chamber, not at Dumbledore specifically, at the room, at the faces that were carrying the weight of what he just handed them. "I also found out," he said, "that my godfather has been in Azkaban for 5 years without a trial. Which is, I don't have formal legal training, obviously, but I've read enough in the last 4 days to understand that that's not legal. A man who was supposed to have me, who is named in my parents' will as my primary guardian, he's been in prison for 5 years and nobody looked at the process of putting him there." He paused. "And I found out this morning that the man who actually betrayed my parents has been living as a rat for 7 years while my godfather paid for what he did. Peter Pettigrew is in ministry custody right now. He was caught this morning. His confession, and whatever physical evidence Aura Moody has collected, will be available for review." There was a sound in the chamber then, not one person's reaction but many people's reactions colliding with each other, a compressed collective sound that was something between shock and recognition. Dumbledore had gone very still. Not the controlled stillness of someone performing composure, a different kind, the kind you couldn't perform. The kind of still you went when something changed that you hadn't planned for. Pettigrew captured. That hadn't been in Dumbledore's morning. Harry could see the recalculation happening behind the blue eyes, the rapid reorganization of what was defensible and what wasn't, and he watched it without satisfaction and without pity. Just observed it, the way you observe a mechanism doing what it does. "I'm not asking this chamber to decide everything today," Harry said. "I know how legal processes work, slowly, carefully, with proper procedure. I'm asking for 3 things." He held up one finger. "My godfather's case gets a proper trial review, with Pettigrew available for testimony. Today, if possible, not the full trial, but the emergency review that establishes reasonable grounds for his release pending that trial. Second finger. The financial charges go through formal prosecution. Completely, with everything documented, No settlements that make it quieter than it should be. Third finger. Someone explains to me why my parents' will was ignored. Not the political explanation, the actual legal accounting of how a co-executor can override the explicit written wishes of the deceased, and whether that is ever lawful under wizarding inheritance law. He paused. I think that last question has an answer, he said. I think the answer is that it isn't lawful. And I think the reason nobody has asked it before now is that the person who did it is the same person who's been in this room for 50 years telling everyone what questions were worth asking. He looked at Dumbledore then. Not with hatred, not with the performed righteousness of someone making a dramatic point, but with the same direct, assessing, unafraid look he'd given the man when they'd first looked at each other across the chamber. He held it for 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked back to his seat, because he'd said what needed saying and sitting down was right. The chamber erupted. Not into chaos, into the specific, pressurized sound of a large room full of people all wanting to say something and the formal constraints of the setting preventing most of them from doing it. Marchbanks let it run for 15 seconds and then brought her gavel down 3 times with the authority of someone who'd been using that gavel for 40 years and knew exactly how hard to hit it. Order, she said, once, and the chamber settled. She looked at Dumbledore. You have the floor, Albus. Dumbledore stood. He stood with the particular gravity of someone who'd risen to speak in important rooms many times and had learned to let the rising itself be a statement. He looked at the chamber. He looked at Harry. His expression was sad. Genuinely, Harry thought. Not performed. The sadness of someone who could see that the situation was what it was and who was about to try to explain it anyway. I owe this chamber an explanation, he said. And more than that, I owe Harry an explanation. He turned slightly toward Harry's chair. You have every right to be angry. What you experienced in that house was wrong. I knew it was not ideal and I told myself the circumstances justified it, and sitting here today, hearing it described through your eyes, I understand how insufficient that was. He paused. I am sorry for that. He said it simply and it landed simply, and Harry watched several faces in the chamber soften slightly, the way faces softened when someone who was trusted apologized, and he'd expected this too. The financial decisions, Dumbledore continued, were made with what I believed, what I genuinely believed, was Harry's welfare in mind. The guardianship expenses were real expenses, even if they weren't channeled as directly as they should have been. The educational trust withdrawals were allocated to what? Harry said. The chamber looked at him. He hadn't raised his voice. He just said it, from his seat clearly, the way you say something when it's a genuine question. Marchbanks looked at Harry. Lord Potter, procedure. He said the educational trust withdrawals were. Harry said. I'm asking what they were. Because the first one was made before my 4th birthday, and it was labeled pre-educational preparation resources, and I want to know what was prepared and where it is. The chamber looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at Harry, and there was something in that look, a flicker, brief, the first moment in the session where the composure had an edge, and then it was gone. The educational trust funds were redirected to. He paused. One beat. To a general account for estate management overhead. Estate management overhead, Harry said. Yes. That account, Harry said, is one of the accounts Gringotts has frozen under the reparations clause. Ragnarok, is there a breakdown of what was in that account? Ragnarok opened a document case. Yes, he said from the observer section. The estate management overhead account shows 3 years of deposits from the educational trust. Withdrawals from that account went to. He produced a page. 23 separate recipients. 17 are political organizations or individual donors in Dumbledore's network. 3 are legitimate estate expenses. 3 are labeled as miscellaneous and have no transaction detail. The chamber noise went up again. Marchbanks hit the gavel once. It went down. Dumbledore said nothing for a moment. The sadness in his face had not disappeared, but something had joined it. The particular expression of someone watching a situation they thought they understood moving into territory they hadn't mapped. Albus, Marchbanks said, and she said his first name with the weight of someone who'd known him for 50 years and was using that familiarity as a very specific kind of tool. I'm going to ask you something directly, and I want a direct answer. She paused. Did you read the will clause? Silence. The underlined clause. Marchbanks said. Prohibiting placement with the Evans family. Did you read it? Another silence. Shorter this time. Yes, Dumbledore said. And you placed the child there anyway. The blood wards required the child to live with a blood relative. Marchbanks said. Yes. I've read your theoretical work on maternal sacrifice magic. I'm aware of the argument. She paused. However, the will does not say unless blood wards are required. It says under no circumstances. She looked at him over her spectacles. Your interpretation overrode the explicit instruction of the deceased. On what legal basis? On the basis that I am the senior magical authority in Britain and I made a judgment. You are the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, Marchbanks said, with a precision that cut. Not the supreme authority over the inheritance rights of wizarding families. Those are separate positions, and conflating them is exactly the kind of overreach that this chamber should have questioned years ago. She looked around the room. Including me. Including all of us. Harry watched Dumbledore. He was watching for the moment, he'd been watching for it since the session started, when the man would stop trying to win on the current ground and shift to a different argument. The ground had been the financials, then the custody, now the will clause. Each time, Dumbledore was finding less room to stand on. He was going to shift. He shifted. I want to speak about something that isn't in the documentation presented today, Dumbledore said, and his voice changed, still composed, but with a gravity that had a different quality. Not defensive. Forward. I want to speak about Voldemort. The name did what it always did in rooms like this, moved through it like a change in air pressure. Several people flinched. Several more went still. Voldemort is not gone, Dumbledore said. Not dead. Not destroyed. He was diminished on the night of October 31st, 1981, but what I have spent 5 years investigating, quietly, carefully, so as not to cause panic in a wizarding world still recovering from 11 years of fear, is that he is not finished. That he will return. And that when he does, Harry Potter is central to how that confrontation resolves. He paused. Everything I have done, the placement, the financial control, the management of Harry's public profile, has been in service of ensuring that when that day comes, Harry is positioned to face it. The chamber was very still. I have made mistakes, Dumbledore said. I have been imperfect. But I have been trying to protect something larger than one childhood. I have been trying to protect everyone. He sat down. Harry let the silence hold for 2 seconds. Then he stood up again. He didn't walk to the podium this time. He stood in his tier, which was slightly below Dumbledore's, and he looked across the chamber at the old man and he said clearly, If that's true, why didn't you tell anyone? Dumbledore looked at him. If Voldemort is coming back, Harry said, and you've known for 5 years, and I'm central to stopping him, why did you keep that secret? Why did you take the money and leave me in a cupboard instead of preparing me? Why didn't you tell the Wizengamot? Why didn't you tell my godfather, before you had him put away without a trial? He paused. Because if you genuinely needed me ready for something, then everything you did made me less ready. I had no education. No magical knowledge. No family. No resources. Nothing. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. The only way your plan makes sense is if you wanted me ready on your terms. Not ready. Your version of ready. Arriving at Hogwarts at 11 not knowing anything, dependent on whoever gave me information first. He paused. Which would have been you? Dumbledore's face had gone still again. Not the same stillness as the Pettigrew announcement, something older and more complicated. The stillness of someone recognizing an argument they've heard before, in their own head, in the dark, in the years of building the plan, in the moments when they pressed that doubt down and kept moving. That's a significant accusation, Dumbledore said quietly. It's a question, Harry said. I haven't accused you of anything beyond what the documents show. The question is whether the documents show the whole picture or whether there's a larger one, and if there is, I'd like it on the record. He looked at Marchbanks. Not today, necessarily. Today is for what we can prove. But the question should be on the record. Marchbanks looked at him. Then she wrote something down. It's on the record, she said. The session broke into procedural motions after that. The formal processes that had to happen, the votes, and the amendments, and the formal filing of charges. Harry sat through them with attention and without impatience, because procedure mattered and he'd said so himself and he intended to be consistent about it. The trial review petition for Sirius Black passed. 31 for, 14 against, 7 abstaining. It passed with a rider that Pettigrew's custody was to be maintained for testimony. Sirius Black was to be transported from Azkaban to the Ministry's secure medical facility pending a formal hearing within 2 weeks. When that vote passed, Harry looked at his hands in his lap and breathed out once, steadily. The formal DMLE charges against Dumbledore were accepted for prosecution, meaning they would proceed through the full legal process, which would take months, but they were accepted, which meant they were real, which meant they were on the record and could not be quietly shelved. Marchbanks accepted the Gringotts reparations clause filing as a parallel civil process. Dumbledore was suspended from the Chief Warlock chair pending the prosecution. He did not argue this. He accepted it with the dignity of someone who'd calculated that arguing would cost more than conceding, and Harry watched him accept it and thought, he's not done. He's recalibrating. He filed that under things to think about later. The session ended at 4:30. Harry sat in his chair as the chamber emptied around him, watching people leave in clusters. The clusters that formed around shared opinions, some of them animated and some of them quiet in the way of people processing something large. Ragnarok appeared beside him. Sirius will be transported to the medical facility tomorrow morning, he said. The healers there will assess him. He's been in Azkaban for 5 years. They won't know. He stopped. What shape he's in, Harry said. Yes. Harry thought about this. About 5 years in the magical world's prison, in a place designed to take the happiness out of you, while innocent of the thing that had put you there. He thought about what that did to a person. He thought about whether he was ready to meet whoever came out of it. Can I see him before he's in a formal setting? Harry said. When he first gets out. Before any of the official stuff. I don't want the first time I meet him to be a procedure. Ragnarok considered. The medical facility allows family visits within 24 hours of arrival, he said. Under the classification of therapeutic support. A pause. You are his family. Yes, Harry said. I am. He was sitting there, the chamber nearly empty now, when footsteps came down the tier behind him, unhurried, deliberate, and he knew before he turned that it was Dumbledore. He turned. The old man stood 2 steps away, in the empty chamber, and he looked at Harry with an expression that was complicated beyond Harry's full ability to read, but he read parts of it. The genuine sadness still there. Something that was not quite regret and not quite admiration and lived in the complicated space between them. And underneath both, something that was almost relief, which was the strangest part. You were extraordinary today, Dumbledore said. Quietly. No one else in hearing range. Harry looked at him. I was accurate, he said. Yes, Dumbledore said. That too. They looked at each other for a moment. Harry thought about the question he'd asked the chamber. If you needed me ready, why did everything you do make me less ready? And he thought about whether Dumbledore had an answer to it that he hadn't given in the session. He thought about whether asking it now was useful or premature. Why did you do it? Harry said. Not the financials. Not the placement. The deeper one. Knowing what you knew about me, knowing whatever it is you know about what's coming, why did you design it so I'd know nothing? Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Harry with the full attention of someone who'd been waiting to be asked the right question by the right person and had simultaneously hoped they wouldn't be. Because I was afraid. Dumbledore said. Of what you'd become if you knew too early. Of what power does to children who have it and know it. He paused. I have seen what power does. I have seen it very close. You were afraid of me, Harry said. I was afraid for you, Dumbledore said. The distinction matters to me. Does it change what happened? A long silence. No, Dumbledore said. It doesn't. Harry looked at him. I think, he said carefully, that you decided what was best for me without asking me or anyone who loved me. And you use fear as the justification because fear is very good at making things that are wrong feel like they're necessary. He paused. I'm not saying your fear wasn't real. I'm saying it made you make choices that hurt people, and the fact that you were afraid while making them doesn't make the people less hurt. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in his face, not performance, not calculation. Something quieter. Something that might, in a different context, have been the beginning of something. You are very like your mother, he said. Good, Harry said. He picked up his notebook. He stood. He was still, very small standing next to Dumbledore, and this had no effect on him whatsoever. He walked past the old man and up the tier steps and out of the Wizengamot chamber, and behind him Dumbledore stood alone in the empty room and looked at the seat where a 6-year-old had spent the afternoon taking apart 50 years of carefully constructed certainty with the patient precision of someone who'd had 4 days and the truth and had found that was enough. The medical facility was on the 4th floor of the ministry, and it smelled like the Muggle hospitals Harry had been to twice for minor injuries, but layered with something underneath that was warmer and more complex. He arrived the next morning with Ragnarok and a healer named Strout who'd been briefed on the situation and had the particular compassion of someone who understood that what they were dealing with was not simply medical. They hadn't told Harry what to expect. He'd asked Ragnarok the night before and Ragnarok had said honestly, "We don't fully know," which Harry had respected for its accuracy and found difficult to sleep after. He heard Sirius before he saw him. A voice from behind a half-open door, talking to someone, low, rapid, with the disjointed quality of someone whose thoughts had been running in the same channels for years and had just been given new information and were trying to reorganize. Doesn't make sense, he was 1, how is a 1-year-old? If Harry filed charges then Harry is here, which means, how is he here? Why is he here before Hogwarts? Why would he? Harry opened the door. Sirius Black was sitting on the edge of the medical bed, and he was thin. The kind of thin that was not natural thinness but its opposite, the absence of what should have been there, the way a fire looked when it had been burning for too long in too small a space. His hair was long and tangled and his face had been striking once, you could still see that, but it had been compressed by years into something hollow in ways that couldn't all be physical. He was wearing the healer's robe they'd put him in, and he was gripping the edge of the bed with both hands and he was looking at the door. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. They held it for 3 seconds, for the kind of look that was not assessment and not recognition because they never actually met, and yet was absolutely recognition, something in Harry's blood finding something in Sirius's face that it already knew. You have James's hair, Sirius said. His voice cracked on the last word. He pressed his mouth together and looked at Harry's eyes. And Lily's eyes. He breathed in, unsteadily. You're so small. He said it with a breaking quality, not in the way of infantilizing but in the way of someone confronting the evidence of 5 lost years. You should be, I know, Harry said. He came into the room and he sat in the chair beside the bed, the visitor's chair, and he looked at Sirius at close range and he thought, this is my godfather. This is the person who was supposed to have me. How are you? Sirius let out a breath that was most of a laugh and none of one. I've been better, he said. Considerably better, at some earlier point. He looked at Harry with the specific, overwhelming attention of someone who'd thought about someone for years and was now confronted with the actuality. The healer said you filed for my trial review? She said there's evidence that I didn't. He stopped. Pettigrew is in custody, Harry said. He'll testify. There are Aurors who were at the scene who have filed affidavits. Amelia Bones has the full case. He looked at Sirius steadily. You're getting a real trial. It'll take a few weeks, but you'll get it. Sirius looked at him. His eyes were dark and very bright with something that he was holding back with what was clearly considerable effort. You did all this, he said. You're 6. I had help, Harry said. Ragnarok. Amelia Bones. Moody. McGonagall. He paused. Regulus. Sirius went absolutely still. Regulus, he said. He's not dead, Harry said. He's been hiding. He has information about Voldemort, something important. Ragnarok is still going through it. He wants to see you. I said I'd ask first. Sirius's face was doing several things at once in the way of faces confronting something they'd grieved and been told was permanent, and have just been informed wasn't. His hands tightened on the bed edge. He's alive, he said. Quietly. Like a man testing weight he didn't trust. Yes, Harry said. Sirius looked at the wall for a moment. He breathed. He looked back at Harry. What are you? He said, not rudely but with genuine bewildered wonder, the way you asked a question when you genuinely had no other vocabulary for it. You're who taught you? You walked into Gringotts at 6 and no one taught me. Harry said. I asked questions and listened to the answers. He paused. And I had a lot of time in a small cupboard to practice thinking. He said this in the same flat way he said everything, and he watched Sirius receive it, and watched something in Sirius's face move towards something that was pain and wouldn't let itself be just pain, wouldn't settle, kept moving. I'm sorry, Sirius said. I know it doesn't cover it. I know. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I let myself. He stopped, pressed his hand over his face briefly. I went after him. After Pettigrew. I should have come for you first and I didn't, and I told myself I'd make it right afterward and then stop. Harry said. Sirius looked at him. You didn't know, Harry said. You didn't know what would happen. You thought you'd catch him and come back and everything would be fixable. He paused. It wasn't your fault that someone took the choice away from you. He looked at Sirius, and Sirius looked back, and there was something large and wordless and mutual in the look. I need you to not spend the next 10 years in guilt about it. I need you, I need a godfather. An actual one. Someone who knew my parents and can tell me about them and can teach me things and who's actually present. He paused. I can't have that if you're drowning in something that's in the past. So. Stop. Sirius stared at him. I mean, feel bad about it, Harry said, with the slight adjustment of someone being fair. That's legitimate. But don't live there. Sirius Black, who had spent 5 years in Azkaban with nothing but dementors and guilt for company, looked at the 6-year-old son of the two people he'd loved most, and he laughed. Not the laugh or cry kind, an actual laugh, surprised out of him, real, the kind of laugh that was also something healing because it was something happening that he hadn't planned for. It transformed his face completely, the way James's laugh had transformed his in the photograph, not the same laugh, different, but in the same family of laughs. You are exactly like both of them, he said. At the same time. Simultaneously. How? Genetics, Harry said, because that was the Muggle explanation and the only one he had, and Sirius laughed again. Harry sat in the visitor's chair beside his godfather's bed and let the afternoon move around them, and they talked, really talked, the way two people talked when there was no one watching and nothing to perform, when the stakes were real and the need was real and the space was safe enough to say true things in. Sirius told him about James and Lily, not the grand narrative but the small specific things that only someone who'd been there knew. The way James ate breakfast. Lily's specific laugh when something was genuinely funny versus her polite laugh. The prank that had gone wrong in 4th year that Sirius had sworn never to tell anyone and told Harry immediately, which Harry suspected was extremely on brand for Sirius even after 5 years in prison. The night of October 30th, 1981, when Sirius had sat with James in the kitchen of the cottage at Godric's Hollow, and they talked until 2 in the morning about nothing important, and everything that was. Harry listened. He asked questions. He stored everything. When the healer came to say visiting time was ending, Harry stood and picked up his notebook and looked at Sirius. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said. "Ragnarok says there's paperwork for your temporary custody arrangement, while the trial review processes. It's complicated, the legal situation, but we're working on it." "Okay," Sirius said. He was looking at Harry with an expression that had settled into something that was still complicated but had found its ground, something that was present rather than lost. "Regulus," Harry said. "Do you want to see him?" Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I do." Harry nodded. He moved toward the door. He was almost through it when Sirius said, "Harry." He turned. "Your mom," Sirius said. She had this thing she used to do when something was really difficult, when it was really hard. She'd pick the one thing she could control and she'd do that one thing really well, and she'd use it to leverage the next thing. She said it was the only way through anything." He paused. "Walking into Gringotts. Asking the question. That was that." Harry thought about a pull in his chest leading him to a white marble bank. About a coin in the toe of a shoe. About asking why when most people would have been too afraid. "She sounds like she was smart," Harry said. "The smartest person I ever knew," Sirius said. Harry went back to Gringotts with his notebook and his photograph and the things that had been given to him in the last 2 days, the stories, the names, the laughter, the weight of 5 years of wrongness starting, slowly and then faster, to become the shape of something right. Chapter 6. What was ours 3 weeks later? The trial was on a Tuesday. It rained in London the whole day, the persistent grey kind that didn't bother being dramatic about it, just settled in and got comfortable. Harry stood at the window of the Gringotts guest room at 7 in the morning and watched water run down the alley cobblestones and thought about how much had happened in 3 weeks and how different 3 weeks could be depending on which 3 weeks they were. He'd spent most of them reading the grimoire, front to back, twice. Selected volumes from the family vault that Doria had flagged as foundational, 2 on inheritance magic, 1 on the specific properties of blood wards that was more nuanced and considerably more critical of Dumbledore's interpretation than anything Dumbledore had ever published on the subject. He'd read Moody's full Auror files on the 1981 aftermath, which Moody had brought himself on the second visit, sitting across the table with his magical eye doing its slow independent rotation, while Harry read and asking sharp clarifying questions whenever Harry looked up. He'd read the transcript of Pettigrew's confession, which had taken 4 sessions and a Veritaserum administration and had produced, in the end, a document that was both pathetic and devastating. A man who had chosen the winning side and spent 7 years as a rat paying for the fact that he'd chosen wrong. He'd also, in between the reading, been learning magic. Not from a teacher, exactly. From the grimoire and from Doria's portrait and from a correspondence he'd begun with a retired charms professor named Flitwick whom McGonagall had suggested and who'd written back with the barely contained enthusiasm of someone who didn't often get 6-year-old students who could already produce a corporeal flame without a wand. The wand question was something Ragnarok had raised carefully. Harry was 3 months short of the age at which wand ownership was legally permitted, which Ragnarok had mentioned once, and then set aside when Harry demonstrated that the age restriction was largely a ministry formality designed for safety reasons that didn't apply to someone who was already performing controlled wandless magic with more precision than most 4th years. The wandless magic had surprised everyone except Harry, who'd been doing it his entire life without knowing what it was. The roof of the gymnasium. The patch of grass by the oak. 4 days ago he'd summoned a book from across the room without thinking about it, and then sat for 10 minutes examining the feeling, the specific quality of reaching and having the thing come, the way it was both easier and harder than it looked, easier because the intention was simple, harder because intention without clarity produced bad results, which was probably true of most things. He'd also visited Sirius every day. This was the part of the 3 weeks that was hardest to think about in organized terms because it wasn't organized, it was accumulative, layered, the slow building of something that didn't have a name yet but was becoming itself regardless. Sirius had been discharged from the medical facility after 4 days, when the healers confirmed that his physical health, while requiring continued attention, was not critical, and his mental health, while requiring continued attention, was likewise not an immediate crisis, which Harry suspected was partly genuine resilience and partly a function of having something to focus on. The something was Harry, and the something was the approaching trial, and the something was Regulus, who had appeared in Sirius's room on the 3rd day. Harry had waited outside for that one. He'd sat in the corridor for 2 hours reading his notebook, and when Sirius came out his eyes were red and he looked like someone who'd set down something very heavy after a very long time carrying it. He hadn't said much. He'd sat down beside Harry in the corridor, and they'd sat there for a while in the particular comfortable silence that had become one of their things, and eventually Sirius had said, "He's really alive." And Harry had said, "Yes." And Sirius had nodded, and that had been enough. Sirius was currently staying in a ministry-arranged safe house, a small flat in magical London that was nondescript and adequately comfortable, and which Sirius referred to as the world's least interesting location with the specific fondness of someone who appreciated having any location at all. Harry visited daily. They had developed, over 3 weeks, the combative, warm, frequently ridiculous dynamic that Harry had suspected from the start was going to be theirs. Sirius made jokes about everything, not because he wasn't serious about things but because humor was his native language, and Harry's dry responses to the jokes seemed to delight him in a way that suggested James Potter had responded similarly. McGonagall had visited twice and spent most of both visits simultaneously horrified by Sirius's behavior, and unable to fully suppress her amusement at Harry's reactions to it, which Harry filed as data about what James and Sirius had been like at school. Today was the trial. Harry got dressed, formal robes this time, which Ragnar had arranged and which were dark and proper and fit him exactly right, and he ate breakfast, and he picked up his notebook and the photograph and he went to find Ragnar. Ragnar was, as always, already there, already dressed in his formal robes, already in possession of the documentation cases. He looked at Harry with the expression that had developed over 3 weeks into something that was still professional but had layers under it now, things that had accumulated through shared work and shared meals and the particular intimacy of 2 people who'd spent 3 weeks dismantling something that had been built to be undismantlable. "Ready?" Ragnar said. "Yes," Harry said. The trial was in the same Wiesengemach chamber as the session 3 weeks ago, but it felt different. The energy was different, less compressed, less pressurized, more deliberate. This was not a session built around revelation. The revelations had happened. This was a session built around consequence. Sirius was brought in through the secure entrance in ministry robes, with 2 Aurors flanking him who had the body language of people performing a formal requirement they knew was nearly obsolete. He'd had 3 weeks of regular meals and sleep and human contact, and the difference from the medical facility was visible, still thin, still carrying the years of Azkaban in the specific way those years settled into a person, but present in a way that was more complete. His eyes were clearer. He moved with something that was beginning, cautiously, to resemble confidence. He found Harry in the gallery immediately, and Harry raised his hand once, briefly, and Sirius's face did the thing it did, the quick, transforming thing that was still surprising because Harry hadn't expected to be the person who caused it, and then he sat in the formal chair with the composure of someone who'd decided to treat this as the procedure it was rather than the ordeal it could be. Marchbanks was chairing again. She looked at the chamber over her spectacles and said "Good morning," in the tone of someone who had already read every document, and was prepared to be efficient about this, which she was. The evidence took an hour and a half. Pettigrew's confession, read into the record by Amelia, who presented it with the clinical precision of someone who found it repellent, and was not going to let that show in the professional context. The Auror affidavits. The reconstruction of what had actually happened on the night of November 1st, 1981, Pettigrew had been the secret keeper, had given Voldemort the location, had staged his own death when Sirius confronted him, had framed the frame with the efficiency of a man who'd been practicing cowardice for years and was good at it. The original arrest and commitment record. The absence of trial documentation. The signatures on the commitment order. Amelia presented it all without reaching for emotion, which was the right call, because the material itself was emotional enough. Harry watched faces in the chamber. Watched people who'd spent 5 years assuming Sirius Black was where he belonged discover that he was where someone had put him, and watched the difference between those two things register. It registered differently in different people. Some of it was guilt. Some of it was anger. Some of it was the particular discomfort of people who were going to need to think about what it meant that they hadn't asked questions. Dumbledore was not present. He'd been advised to stay away from Wizengamot proceedings pending his prosecution, which he had complied with. Harry thought about him occasionally, not with the consuming intensity of an enemy, but with the focused attention of someone who knew the matter wasn't resolved. The prosecution would take months. There were elements of the story Harry still didn't have, the thing Regulus knew about Voldemort, the Peveril wand, the nature of whatever Dumbledore had been building toward. Those were future conversations, future investigations. He'd learned, over 3 weeks, not to try to hold everything at once. Sirius's testimony was last. He stood in the formal space and he spoke for 20 minutes, and he was honest in the particular, effortless way of someone with nothing left to lose by being honest. He told them about the switch, his idea, he said, because he thought he was the obvious choice and had wanted to protect James. He told them about the night he'd learned what Pettigrew had done. He told them about going after him with the specific, desperate logic of someone who hadn't yet accepted that the most important thing was already lost. He told them about 12 seconds on a London street and the blast and not understanding what had happened and the Aurors arriving and nobody asking any questions at all. He said that last part once and didn't repeat it. He didn't need to. The vote was 44 for acquittal, 3 against, and nobody pretended the 3 against were doing anything other than protecting a position rather than arguing a legal point. Marchbanks announced the result in the same voice she used for everything, which was itself a kind of respect for the weight of the moment, treating it as real rather than theatrical. Sirius Black was acquitted. The sound in the chamber was not cheering, not quite. It was more complicated than cheering. It was the sound of a room full of people recalibrating, some of them loudly and some of them quietly, and a few of them, Harry noticed, not quite sure what to do with it yet. That was fine. Recalibration took time. Harry looked at Sirius. Sirius was looking at his hands. Flat on the arms of the chair, just looking at them, the way you looked at something when you needed a moment to let real things be real. Then he looked up, and he found Harry, and whatever happened in his face in that second was not something Harry could describe or would try to. He just held it, across the room, for as long as it needed. Then he grinned, the sudden, full-face grin that Harry had seen once before, in the medical facility, when something had surprised real joy out of him, and it was James's grin, almost, but with its own specific character, and Harry felt something in his chest that was not the pull and not the family magic but something else. Something he thought might simply be happiness, which he was going to have to get used to. In the corridor afterward, while the legal formalities processed, Moody appeared beside Harry with the particular materialization of someone who could be anywhere without announcement. He was in his aura robes, his magical eye doing its habitual independent sweep of the corridor. "Well done," Moody said. He said it simply, without decoration. "We all did it," Harry said. "You started it," Moody said. "Matters who starts it. Lots of people knew things were wrong. You were the one who walked into a bank and said so." He paused. His magical eye fixed on Harry briefly. "You know Dumbledore's prosecution is going to be long and ugly." "I know. You know he has people who are going to push back at every stage. Who are going to find procedural problems and alternative interpretations and witnesses who remember things conveniently." "I know that too." "And you know he's probably right about Voldemort," Moody said. Quietly, with the directness of someone who decided Harry was old enough for directness, which Harry appreciated. "Not about how to handle it," Not about what he did, but about the fact of it. Something's still out there. Harry thought about the thing Regulus had told him, the information that Ragnar had spent 3 weeks carefully processing, the thing about how Voldemort had made himself harder to kill. He thought about what Dumbledore had said in the Wizengamot chamber, he will return. He thought about the question he'd asked Dumbledore in the empty chamber afterward, which Dumbledore hadn't fully answered, and the other questions building behind it. I know, Harry said. That's a different problem for a different time. Good, Moody said. Tackle one thing at a time. You're 6. He paused. That said, when you want to start actually preparing for the other problem, come find me. I will, Harry said. Moody nodded once, sharply, and walked away with the habitual efficiency of someone whose next 5 moves were already planned. Harry watched him go and thought that Alastair Moody was probably his favorite person he'd met in 3 weeks, which was a crowded category and a strong statement. Sirius found him 20 minutes later, in a small anteroom off the main corridor where Harry had gone to read while the formal processing happened, because formal processing required almost no input from him and he had a chapter left in the Blood Ward volume. Sirius looked at him in the doorway with an expression that had settled into something that was not going to be destabilized by much, the expression of someone who'd had the worst 5 years of their life and had just had them formally acknowledged as unjust, and was now standing in a corridor feeling the specific, disorienting freedom of what came next. Lord Potter, he said, with a gravity that lasted about 1 second before the corner of his mouth went. My custody paperwork has been approved. I am now officially your legal magical guardian. He paused. Ragnar handed me about 50 documents to sign. My hand may never recover. Ragnar is thorough, Harry said. He is terrifying, Sirius said. He's 2 feet shorter than me and I have been afraid of him every day for 3 weeks. He respects you, Harry said. He told me you asked good questions about the legal documents. I asked questions because I didn't understand them. That's what good questions are, Harry said. Sirius stared at him. You're doing the thing, he said. What thing? The thing where you say something that sounds like normal information and it lands like, James used to do it but with worse timing. He pointed at Harry. You have his brain and her delivery. Do you understand how unfair that is? To whom? Harry said. To me specifically, who is going to spend the next 11 years being outwitted by someone a third of my age. He came into the anteroom and sat down across from Harry, and the humor settled into something that was still warm but steadier. We need to talk about where we're going to live, he said. The safe house is fine, but it's not right for a permanent situation. And I can't. He paused. I can't give you back Godric's Hollow. I don't think either of us would want that, not as a home. It's a ruin and a memorial and it should stay what it is. He looked at his hands. But Potter Keep is yours. Has been maintained. And the Highlands estate is. He paused again. Have you seen it? Not yet, Harry said. Soon. The Black family had a property in London. Grimmauld Place. It's been mine since Regulus was declared dead and I became heir, but it's dark. Literally, not figuratively, it's full of dark objects, and my mother's portrait, and 17 years of Black family ideology embedded in the walls. He made a face. It needs work. Significant work. But it's in London, which has practical advantages, and it is quite large, and I thought. He stopped. I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is, where do you want to live? Actually want. Harry thought about this. He thought about the properties he knew about and the one he hadn't seen yet. He thought about what want meant when you'd been living in a cupboard, not what was adequate, not what was available, but what he actually, genuinely wanted. Potter Keep, he said. It's in Wales. It has the family portraits. Doria is there. She's been giving me transfiguration theory lectures through the frames in my guest room, which are somehow connected to the ones in the keep. He paused. And I want to see the Highlands estate. Not to live there permanently, not yet, but I want to go. He looked at Sirius. Soon. Before Hogwarts. 5 years? Sirius said. 5 years? Harry agreed. A lot of time. Sirius looked at him. You're going to spend them reading everything in that vault and learning things that make the Hogwarts curriculum look like a starting point, aren't you? Probably, Harry said. Good, Sirius said simply. He meant it. Harry could tell, no performance, no qualification, just a person who wanted the person in front of him to be everything they could be. I'll help where I can. Defense, flying, the stuff the books can't give you. He paused. I was a good orar before. He stopped. I was good at the practical parts. Less good at the sitting still and reading parts. We'll complement each other. Can you actually teach me to fly? Harry said. Sirius's face transformed. It was immediate and complete, the way his good expressions were, total. Can I, Harry? Teaching you to fly is the thing I was born to do. Your father was the best natural flyer I've ever seen, and if you have half his instinct, I levitated myself onto a school roof at age 6. Sirius stared at him for a moment. Then he said, That's not flying technically, that's directed levitation, but it is a genuinely excellent sign. He paused. I'm getting you a broom this week. I'm not old enough for a broomstick legally. I am your legal magical guardian, and I will make that decision. Sirius said, with the specific dignity of someone invoking their authority for the first time and finding it extremely satisfying. That is literally what guardians are for. Harry looked at him. He was trying not to smile. He was not entirely succeeding. Okay, he said. Potterkeep was everything the portraits had described and more, in the specific way of things that have been real so long they don't need to impress you. It stood in the Welsh hills in a valley that got afternoon sun and morning mist, stone walls and slate roof and gardens that had been maintained by Gringotts administered charm and not by human hands for 5 years, which gave the gardens a slightly independent quality, as if they'd been making their own decisions. The portraits inside were lively and opinionated and immediately fascinated by Harry in a way that was both gratifying and slightly overwhelming. Doria relocated her portrait to the main study within an hour of their arrival and began organizing a curriculum in a manner that suggested she'd been planning it for several weeks. Sirius walked through the house with the expression of someone processing a large number of emotions simultaneously. He'd been here before, Harry realized, he'd visited James here, and the house would have layered memory over every room. Harry gave him space for it without making it a thing, which Sirius seemed to appreciate. They moved through the rooms and Harry looked at everything with attention, the bookshelves, the family artifacts, the small accumulated evidence of the people who'd lived here. A set of Quidditch trophies in a cabinet. Books with James's handwriting in the margins. A wooden box on a shelf in the study that opened, at Harry's touch, to reveal a set of enchanted cards that cycled through Quidditch players and had clearly been played with extensively by someone who'd cared about them. In the kitchen, on a high shelf that required a stool to reach, Harry found a photograph in a frame. Not the same one McGonagall had given him, different, bigger, a group. His parents in the center, laughing, and around them people Harry didn't know yet but would learn. A tall red-haired woman who must be Molly Weasley from the context of several children hanging off her, a quiet man Harry didn't recognize, a younger Sirius with less of Azkaban in him and more of his whole life in front of him. Frank and Alice Longbottom with baby Neville held carefully between them, and on the edge. Looking at the group with the particular expression of someone who loved what they were looking at, Remus Lupin, who Harry hadn't met yet but whose name he'd found in the grimoire in a footnote his father had written, Moony, tell him when you find him. He stood on the stool and took the photograph down and held it. Sirius appeared in the kitchen doorway. He saw what Harry was holding and went still. Remus, Harry said. Where is he? Sirius let out a breath. Alive, he said. I don't know where exactly. After that night, after I was arrested, he disappeared. He was grieving and probably thought I was guilty like everyone else and he stopped. I can find him. Now that I'm legally. He stopped again. I can find him. We should, Harry said. He was my father's closest friend. He put the photograph carefully on the kitchen table, face up. And the note says to tell him? Tell him what? I don't know yet, Harry said. I think he'll know when I say it. He put the photograph in his notebook, between the others. They stayed at the keep for 3 days. Harry spent them reading, flying for the first time, which was exactly what he thought it would be, which was like the full feeling when he operated, but voluntary and physical and with wind in it, and Sirius watching from the ground with an expression of someone whose heart had just been broken open by joy, and talking with the portraits and thinking. Sirius spent them cooking, cleaning, sleeping, and existing in the gradually expanding manner of someone relearning how to have a life. On the third evening they sat on the back steps as the last of the sun went off the hills and ate what Sirius had made, which was better than Harry had expected given that Sirius had spent 5 years in Azkaban, and Harry thought about going back to Gringotts. Not to stay, he didn't need to stay. He needed to go back for one last thing, and he'd known this since the second day, but he'd let the 3 weeks happen first because the 3 weeks needed to happen. Now they had. The next morning he told Sirius he needed to go to Gringotts alone, which Sirius received with an expression of "Are you sure?" that he respected enough not to say out loud. Harry took the floor from the keep's kitchen to Diagon Alley and walked the familiar cobblestones to the white marble steps, and it was different now, this walk different from the first time 3 weeks ago with the coin in his pocket and the pull in his chest and nothing else. Now he walked it knowing what was inside, knowing the corridors, knowing where to go. Grakner at the front counter looked up as he came in, and gave him the exact same professional nod he'd given on the first day. Harry appreciated the consistency. He went to Ragnar's office and knocked. "Come," Ragnar said. Harry came in and sat down. Ragnar looked at him across the desk with the expression that had taken 3 weeks to develop, the professional baseline with the things under it. He folded his hands. "The acquittal went smoothly," Ragnar said. "Yes." Harry paused. "The prosecution schedule? The first formal hearing on the financial charges is in 6 weeks. Gringotts' legal team is prepared. The Wizengamot has assigned a special prosecutor who is not affiliated with Dumbledore's network." Ragnar paused. "It will be long. It will be contested. He will have advocates who are skilled." "I know." Harry looked around the office, the shelves of ledgers, the weighted documents, the lamp, the plain plaster ceiling. He thought about the first time he'd sat here, small in a chair slightly too large, the Potter ledger open on the desk between them. He thought about the question he'd asked at the teller counter, which had felt important and specific and which now, 3 weeks later, he understood had been even more important than he'd known, not just the beginning of a legal process but the first moment of being, actually and completely, himself. He said, "I wanted to say thank you." Ragnar looked at him. "Not for the legal work specifically," Harry said. "For you could have processed me as a case. As an account recovery situation. That would have been correct procedure, and it would have been fine, and I'd still have been better off than I was." He paused. "You didn't do that. You treated it like it mattered beyond the account. You..." He stopped, looking for the word. "You were thorough with me. Not just with the documents." Ragnar was quiet for a moment. Outside the office, the bank continued, the sounds of an ordinary day, carts and transactions and the massive indifferent engine of accumulated wealth doing what it always did. "Gringotts," Ragnar said carefully, "has a complicated history with the wizarding world. There are things we have been denied, rights we have fought for, centuries of being considered less than what we are by people who benefited from our work." He paused. "We are not naturally inclined toward sentiment. We are inclined toward principle. What was done to your family was wrong, not simply illegal, wrong, in the more fundamental sense." He paused again. "I acted on principle." "I know," Harry said. "That's why it meant something." Ragnar looked at him. The gold eyes held something that had been building for 3 weeks and was not going to be named, in the way of things between people who communicate primarily through action and had communicated through 3 weeks of shared work and shared purpose. "The Peveril account," Harry said. The aspects I haven't accessed yet. The things Regulus knows about Voldemort. The questions I have about what's coming. He looked at Ragnar. I'm going to need to keep working on those things. I know, Ragnar said. I'd like to do that from Potterkeep primarily. But I'd like to keep this room available. If that's appropriate. He paused. For consultations. Ragnar said, without any expression except the one he always had and the layers under it. Lord Potter. You are an 11th-generation client of Gringotts. This office is available to you as long as you require it. A pause. And perhaps somewhat beyond that. Harry nodded. He stood. He picked up his notebook. He was about to move toward the door when Ragnar said, One more thing. Harry turned. Ragnar reached into the bottom drawer of his desk, the deep one, the one Harry had never seen him open, and produced something that Harry recognized immediately, because it was the same size and quality as the photograph McGonagall had given him and the one from the Keep kitchen, but the frame was different. Older. The kind of frame that had been made for something specific. He held it out. Harry came back to the desk and took it. The photograph showed a woman and a man, not young, his grandparents, from the resemblance. His grandmother was the one Doria's portrait had mentioned, and she was exactly how Harry would have pictured her if he'd had enough information to picture her, sharp-faced, dark-eyed, with the specific brightness of someone who found the world interesting and intended to interact with it fully. His grandfather was broader, quieter in the photograph, with a hand on his wife's shoulder and an expression of someone who didn't need to be the most interesting person in a room and was perfectly happy about it. Between them was a small boy who was maybe 3, maybe 4, with dark untidy hair and glasses that were too big for his face and an expression of absolute concentration directed at a butterfly that had landed on his finger. His father, at 3 years old, looking at a butterfly with the focused delight of a child who found everything worth paying attention to. Harry looked at it for a long time. It was in your account records, Ragnar said. Filed with the estate documents. I should have given it to you earlier, but the timing, no, Harry said. Now is right. He held the photograph. His father concentrated on his butterfly. His grandparents stood in the summer light of somewhere Harry didn't know yet but would find, smiling with the ease of people who didn't know what was coming and were completely, presently happy. Thank you, Harry said. He said it simply and meant it completely and put the photograph in his notebook, where it sat with the others, adding its weight to the accumulated material of people he was learning to carry. He walked back through Gringotts, the marble hall, the goblins at their counters, the chandeliers and the high vaulted ceiling with its painted record of mountains and fire and history. He walked through the silver doors and through the bronze doors and down the white marble steps into Diagon Alley, where the afternoon had turned clear after the morning's rain and the cobblestones were bright with it. He stood at the top of the steps. He thought about a question asked 3 weeks ago at a teller counter by a 6-year-old in clothes that didn't fit, standing in a place he'd never been, following a pull in his chest toward the truth about himself and his family. He thought about everything that question had opened and all the things that had fallen into place because of it, not easily, not cleanly. Nothing was clean when 5 years of deliberate wrongness was being made right, but steadily. One thing, and then the next thing, and then the next. He thought about his parents' will. Under no circumstances. He thought about his parents in their photographs, laughing, present, alive in the way photographs kept people alive. He thought about Sirius learning to be free again, and Regulus learning to be alive again, and McGonagall learning to trust her own judgment, and Moody sharpening his constant vigilance into something useful, and Amelia Bones filing things that needed to be filed, and Augusta Longbottom demanding the law be the law, and Ragnar in his office acting on principle, and the long, deep roots of the Potter family magic. Patient in its faults for 5 years, waiting for someone to come and claim it. He thought, they tried to leave me with nothing. He thought, they left me with everything. He walked down the steps into Diagon Alley, notebook in hand, photographs between its pages, the cloak against his ribs and the grimoire back at Potterkeep, and the pull in his chest settled now, not gone, never quite gone, but no longer urgent, no longer dragging him towards something he hadn't found yet. Pointing forward steadily, toward the things that came next. He was 6 years old. He was lord of 3 ancient houses with more to come. He was the son of James Potter, who laughed with his whole face, and Lily Potter, who underlined the things that mattered and who had, between them, on the last day of their lives, tried as hard as they could to protect him. He walked into the alley and the afternoon light fell on the cobblestones, and somewhere at the other end of a flu connection Sirius was probably attempting to cook something ambitious and Doria was probably arguing with the portrait of some long-dead transfiguration expert, and the library in the Highlands estate was waiting, 63 years of sealed knowledge waiting for the right blood to open it, and there was so much to do. So much to learn, so much to claim and build and understand. And Harry Potter was not afraid of any of it. He turned left at the apothecary and walked further into Diagon Alley, reading the shopfronts, watching the witches and wizards move in their ordinary patterns around him, existing in a world he'd found 3 weeks ago and had not finished finding, and the question that had started it all, why is Dumbledore stealing from my parents' graves, had become not an end but a beginning, the first line of a story that was only now, really, getting started.